Okay, so a concept I wanted to bring up, there are some nice little Greek terms that many of us are familiar with, particularly those of us that do reconstructions or study classical religions. The two terms that you typically see described are orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy usually is used to describe many of the Abrahamic religions. They're orthodoxic in the sense that doxia meaning belief, ortho meaning straight, so straight belief or correct belief. So your sort of allegiance to a particular ideal or prophecy or whatever the case may be. And a lot of older, particularly indigenous traditions are orthopraxic, from praxis meaning practice or ritual, and obviously ortho meaning straight, so correct practice. They're much more focused on a system or method of ritual, or an overarching kind of theme of how ritual is done, not necessarily every finer detail, but the sort of framework in which rituals and religious structures and festivals are practiced. And that's valuable in that these traditions are clearly more focused on the praxis, and these other ones are focused more on the doxia. But both of them have those two. There are orthodoxic elements of even older polytheistic indigenous traditions, and there are clearly orthopraxic elements of many of the orthodoxic traditions, particularly Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, which have some very specific ways of performing certain rituals and rites, specific things you're supposed to read at specific times, and a general framework to which masses are conducted, to use as an example. But there's a third term that you sometimes hear mentioned. Usually it's mentioned in reference to medicine, but I think it applies to all religion, creating a sort of trifecta. And the third term is orthopathy, from the Greek word pathos, which means suffering, but also means passion. So it's generally used in religious terms to refer to one's affections, one's religious affections. And speaking from the perspective of Greek religion and also the related Roman religion, one's mindset, the Romans would have called pietas, what the Greeks would have called eusebia, ritual piety, is very much in line with the sort of aspect of one's pathos, one's way of approaching deity. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, Hannes, with Reconstructionist traditions particularly, there's this sort of ubiquity associated with personal gnosis, UPG, unverified personal gnosis, the sort of instinctive and sort of naturalistic kind of experience of deity that doesn't necessarily correlate cleanly to a specific belief set or specific ritual framework, but are those natural sorts of connections to deity that are really necessary for having a living practice. So I think that third element isn't as commonly the focus of most religious traditions, though there are ecstatic ones that do. I would argue that a lot of mystical traditions, particularly like forms of occultism or mysticism or Gnostic traditions, Gnostic with a little g, also a big G, depending on how you want to look at it, are more orthopathic in orientation than they would be orthopraxic or orthodoxic. So, anybody have any thoughts about that? I know it's a pretty heavy subject.
I'm sure you're aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
And the Gnostics with the big G, I believe.
Yeah. Which still, in and of itself, is fairly misleading. Because that's still a lot of different kinds of Gnosticism. Yeah, I find studying Gnosticism and a lot of the sort of heterodoxic or heresies of the Christian Church and related forms of Gnosticism, like that of the Persians and sort of Jewish Gnosticisms or mysticisms, are valuable, particularly from my tradition, because Gnosticism, particularly Christian Gnosticism, is a sort of gray area between Christianity and earlier forms of Greek religion and polytheism in general. There are a lot of elements in Gnosticism that would appear more paganistic in a certain sense. The Hellenistic period, as I've mentioned here before, and many other people have, the Hellenistic period was very syncretic. And there wasn't always a very clean separation between the Jewish elements, the Christian elements, the Greek, the Egyptian, the Persian, the Syrian, the Babylonian. All these sorts of things that were kind of correlated largely through the motivation of these mystery sort of traditions, ascetic practices, and philosophical schools that very much focused on what I was saying before, that sort of orthopathy. Gnosis, or as the Neoplatonists would call it, henosis, is a sort of irrational kind of connection to deity. At least that's how many of the Greeks would have seen it. They would have seen it as an irrational sort of connection that wasn't clearly defined in the way of many of the earlier traditional philosophies. So it was ecstatic in the way we would use it in modern terms.
Would you say that the division between the Roman and the Greek Hellenistic, the traditions, were they kept in any way that was detectable after the introduction of Christianity as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. Though they were more preserved in how those cultures evolved past Christianization. But elements of those earlier divisions are definitely clear. They're subtle, but there are differences. Looking at the cultus deorum versus the Greek system, you see that they're very much motivated by the same kind of methodological structure, where there's this kind of a specific order and a specific kind of format a ritual is done. There's a lot of kind of pomp and circumstance to them. They're very much focused on the aesthetic, colors, particular statuary, particular incenses that are used for particular deities, particular offerings, whether those were physical sacrifices or whether they were foodstuff offerings like bread and fruit. But there was also little things that were different in Roman religion. For instance, the use of mola salsa, which was a combination of sort of a bread powder and salt that was used more for the aspect of purification, whereas with the Greek it was much more simplistic, and usually it was water. It was the kernos was more specifically the use of purification. But they're very, very, very similar. Not just because the Romans took a lot from the Greeks in their sort of mythology, but also because the Roman and early Etruscan and even much earlier Mycenaean and Minoan cultures were contemporary to one another, that they were all living in and around the Mediterranean. I mean, you see this evidenced by several of the different historians, the fact that the Thracians and the Dacians and many of the people that were living in Anatolia were constantly interacting with the Greeks. So there was a lot of cultural influx going on for a very, very long time. Now, how that developed past that really has to do with how Greece and Italy developed, becoming very different cultures. I mean, if you look at modern Roman Catholicism and compare it to Greek Orthodox, there is a lot more difference between those two than there would be between the cultus deorum and the Greek religion. So, but some of that we don't really know. Some of the variation we don't know, because not everything survived from the classical period or even from the late Roman period. So there is a fair amount of guesswork that is being done to make reasonable sense of it. So part of the reason why comparative religion and comparative mythology and comparative linguistics are very important to understanding these cultures. And there are whole schools of thought around this. So you see this particularly, I'm sure you're probably familiar, a lot of the things that people do to try to make sense of Celtic and Norse mythology and Slavic mythology are done through cross-Indo-European comparative sort of analysis, making sense of it by looking at other European cultures. Primarily, one of the ones that we've done is by looking at Vedic culture with the earlier Hindu traditions and seeing how those are similar to what we understand of Germanic, Celtic, Roman, Greek, Hittite, and all these earlier European cultures.
And just to backtrack somewhat, I would assume it's safe to presume that this divide perhaps had something to do with the existence of the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, perhaps, with the Greek Orthodoxy and.
Yes, I mean some of that does play into that. The Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire was the eastern faction of the Roman Empire that existed many centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire itself. And Byzantium is particularly interesting, and I've mentioned this a few times because it was an example of how you could have a multicultural sort of nation state that existed after Christianization. For quite some many centuries, you had Christians and various different sorts of pagan religions existing, even though the state religion of the Byzantium was Christianity. It was an Orthodox form of Christianity, and that existed for quite a while until many of the Orthodoxy reformed and became much more strict and much more aggressive towards these barbaric cults as they saw them.
Perhaps even to some extent as far as to the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, and that's largely why I really look at it as a part of the reason why the church became as aggressive as it did. It wasn't just because they felt that polytheism was evil or that it was wrong or that it was barbaric, but also because they were trying to codify themselves and their presence in the world in response to a lot of these other cultures that did want to take over, that were fighting over land and resources with them. So having a clear identity, having a clear imperial identity was important to the early church. Because if you really think about it, that's effectively what the church was. It was a sort of rebirth of the Roman Empire. It was a new form of imperialism that was rooted in a more sort of theocratic state as opposed to just a pure military state. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
We've just been sort of talking about the function of different aspects of the formation of religious traditions. I brought up the idea of orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy, and how each tradition seems to have a little bit more of a focus on one or the other. Polytheistic traditions tend to be orthopraxic. A lot of Abrahamic traditions tend to be more orthodoxic, though not always. And a lot of more esoteric traditions tend to be orthopathic, focusing on the sort of religious affection or ecstatic experience of deity or divinity.
Yeah, I do find that to be true for the most part.
Yeah, and it's definitely easily seen with modern occultism and witchcraft traditions. They tend to be more orthopathic, in my experience, and what I've studied and what I've gleaned from those I've talked to who are more into those practices.
Yes, and I can also speak from experience at that point as well.
And then after that, we were sort of getting into the differences between Greek and Roman religion. Roman religion, which I've called cultus deorum. It's also sometimes called, at least in modern practice, it's sometimes called religio romana. At least that's what the Nova Roma likes to call it. But they're both adequate terms. It's with the understanding that a lot of these earlier traditions didn't really have religions in the modern sense of the term, and more traditions than anything. They were more focused on sort of continuing a cultural practice that was sort of the default for people who were a part of that culture. But those differences in modern discourse do seem a little semantic if you don't have a good understanding of why those differences are. That largely comes down to understanding the language. That's our sort of our key into these older cultures, is their understanding of what we know of those languages.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, Hannes, since your focus is more on the northern cultures, how would you say the role of libation, or a sort of liquid sacrament, wine, beer, mead, its usage in ritual differs from the more Greco-Roman methods, the more Mediterranean methods of libation?
Do you mean in? I mean, I've hard to make a distinction between, I mean, modern and more traditional, in the sense of, I mean, obviously we have a long now Christian tradition in these nations, Scandinavia.
Yeah, communion.
I would still say that there's an element of that, and I can't really speak in relation to Greco-Roman as much, but I would say that such things are still present. In the way that you, when you cheer, for instance, you raise the glass, and you know, this kind of thing, and that there's a specific term for preserving the beverage that is common, so to say. So sharing amongst the table, for instance.
Yeah.
There's that element.
Well, I'm aware in a lot of modern heathenry that there are the two concepts of blot and sumbel. I'm not sure if I pronounced the last one correctly. From what I can see, the difference seems to be more, at least from a sort of topical perspective, that the continuation of the drinking period itself, of the drinking ritual, is of more importance than it would be with the Greek. The Greek seems to be more articulated, or almost punctuated, in that there are instances where you do drink, but oftentimes it's a part more reserved for the festival aspect, usually after ritual. And in the Greeks and Roman systems, it's more common to pour libation to and name out specific deities in a sort of regiment like that. And if they're chthonic, if they're more earthly or underworld type deities, oftentimes, at least in an outdoor ritual, the libation is offered into the earth, where it's elsewhere it's usually offered into a bowl. And I do know that there are bowls that you can make similar offerings in Norse tradition, but there isn't so much of a continuation. What I've seen with Norse tradition, with sacred drink, just to use it in that terminology, it very much seems to be that sharing aspect, that you pass the horn around from person to person to person, and you're trying to keep that line. It makes it very distinct. That aspect seems very distinct compared to other things that I could sort of mention. I'm not sure how much of that is preserved in Celtic culture. What I've studied of Roman period Celts, the Gauls, the Gallo-Brythonic culture, seems to reflect an earlier European tradition that seems a lot more similar to, say, Vedic religion. But the Norse tradition seems to be it's set itself apart in just that one aspect than it would from many of the other European cultures in the area.
Well, it does seem to be distinct in that matter.
I think that sometimes it's a useful exercise when you're studying religions, when you're studying different cultures, to see those distinct elements and explore them. Why is this so distinct? What about this exactly is the way it is? Why is it the way it is? And the sort of mindset and the culture. And a lot of times, aside from the more philosophical and ideological concerns, some of them are actually very practical. You know what I mean? Like, what is available in your climate? What is your weather like at the time? What are the sorts of things that your culture values? What sorts of foodstuffs do you have available to you? What kinds of things can you create? What sorts of things would you be able to wear in a ritual? And who is running that ritual and why? They're more practical concerns than they are necessarily these very philosophical ones, as I mentioned. So.
Yes, I was going to touch on this. Two aspects that just come to mind is the fertility of the earth. If you compare it to the Mediterranean and then the northern climate, which up here we have a very distinct seasonal changes, and this has very some effects that have a different play a different role, I would say. You'd be more concerned with the crops dying out of not drought, but long periods of cold climate and how that affects the people and what they're able to do. And then, of course, the availability of clean water when it comes to beverages, for instance.
Yeah. One of the things,
housed, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I've noticed, I guess in a certain sense, I'm a little lucky because of my particular climate and its similarity to Greece and Italy. I live in Southern California, and I actually live in a drier part of Southern California, kind of out in the sticks a little bit. So it's very, very hot in the summer, oftentimes getting up to 105 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And the winter is usually fairly late, and when it does arrive, it's either bone-chillingly dry cold that hovers around freezing, or below freezing because of wind chill and very, very rainy. And in fact, that's largely how my winters here are defined, is by a stormy season. It's very common, usually in and around, and particularly after the Christmas season, in January and February and leading into early March until, the plants come back, to have, a good 2 or 3 months where there's sporadic rains. And looking at kind of the Greek concept, the very month or months depending, because every few years there's an added month added to winter. There's a second Poseidia or Poseidon, excuse me, yeah. The festival is called Poseidon. That's a festival to Poseidon. The month is called Poseidon. And that's like the last month of, well, it's technically not the last month because the actual year in Greece begins in late July, early August with the Panathenaea around the first lunar cycle there. The sign of the first crescent is when each month begins in the Greek calendar. But there's an added month to winter, sort of reflecting the idea that you're going to have this long, wet, rainy season where crops are not going to grow. And it's difficult. And since, a lot of Mediterranean cultures were seafaring, their association wasn't just with the rain and the storms and the sort of crying of Demeter and the loss of Persephone, but also the sort of rage of Poseidon, the sort of the stormy seas. And I've really been able to see that for most of my life because there's this concept of the marine layer that we get here in California. Even when you're pretty far inland, even if you're several hours inland, the ocean brings in constantly fog and rain and storms and clouds. It's usually bright and sunny, but when it's not, it's really, really foggy or rainy and gross, and we usually get a lot of flood warnings and things like that, particularly in the winter. When the ground is very cold and solid, there's even more of a propensity for some pretty gross weather conditions. So I think it's interesting that the way I see the seasons and the way I've been able to see the seasons versus maybe some of the other cultures. I know several people who are heathens who practice Norse or even Celtic traditions, which in a lot of cases were based in colder climates. And a lot of times they've enjoyed being up in the mountains. Here in Southern California, you can actually go up into mountains. There are whole mountain communities where they get those nice winters. So I've only seen snow a handful of times. I've never slept overnight in the snow. That's to show you how little I've actually had those kind of solid winters.
And another note in regards to this would be that I could touch upon is when it comes to seasons, we have rötmånad, literally rotting month, like in June, July, something like this. So that would also have an effect, not just the winters. Perhaps if we're going to, we'd explore the Celtic, the Gaelic, perhaps. If you look at the typical climate in Britain as a whole, it's perhaps towards what you described about the windy and the wet and the very moist kind of climate that they have, especially around the British Isles and what have you.
It's an insular climate, so even though they do get snow in some areas, it's not nearly as heavy as it would be in northern parts of Western Europe, even more or less Scandinavia, where snow is a very big defining feature of the landscape for many parts of the year. And I remember talking to some of my friends that live in the Midwest and up further north and parts of Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana, and they were talking about how there would be some years when there would still be frost on the ground in early April, that they would be shoveling snow still into March, and April would be when they got their break from it. So it really, I think a lot of your environment and thinking over centuries, over whole generations of people, help to define the sorts of symbolism that are meaningful to you, if you get my meaning. But then there's some things that sort of are sort of lost in translation. For instance, there were lions in Western Europe for centuries, and we hunted them to extinction. So a lot of these sorts of references that we have to lions later and later in history, they echo to an earlier tradition of these wilder animals that were roaming parts of Europe in Roman times and previous to that. So it's really interesting.
And I think in regards to that, one of the hypotheses is also not just hunting, but the bread and games that was very prevalent in the Roman, culture, which later spread, and you had maybe the height of this, the Colosseum, but it was very lengthy, an important part of society. So the animals were killed for fun, especially lions. And
one of the sort of adaptations that I've actually sort of made in my private practice, and the sort of symbolisms that I've associated because of my area, is through the local flora and fauna. Dionysus is one of the deities that I honor, and one of his most ubiquitous animal symbols is that of the leopard. We don't obviously have leopards in Southern California, but what we do have is mountain lions, which are very big and fearsome animals that, oftentimes, if you live in the right area, can come down into your area, and you have to take your dogs up. And so I often make that association with mountain lions and Dionysus, this sort of wildness, this sort of ferocity of ecstasy. But we also have coyotes, which are fairly unique, and their sort of point of reference to anything historical from these earlier European cultures or Near Eastern cultures isn't always a very clean sort of thing. Though, say I was a devotee of Anubis, his association is with the jackal. I think a coyote is an excellent analog to the jackal.
Perhaps to a lesser extent, fox.
Yeah, we get quite a few. I think we actually get these kind of grayish type foxes out here sometimes. They're real small. You don't see them a lot.
There's the expression cunning as a fox. When I think of coyotes, they're more of a flock. I think foxes are more, lonesome ranger.
Yeah.
But kind of that.
Another example would be, and also through Dionysus and his association with snakes, the rattlesnake. I mean, there's nothing more evocative and sort of ecstatic than when you're walking around on a hike, even with a friend, and you hear that rattle. You're like, oh shit. Okay, I'm going to back up now. That kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that you experience in nature that are very real. A lot of times a very real danger, or sometimes something that's actually fertile, something that's very bountiful, that represents a time when those sorts of things were necessary to your survival. Feeding yourself or not dying, in many cases, yeah. Seems like we're having a lot of connection issues today. Or maybe people were finding other rooms, who knows. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing all right. I found it really interesting, just all the correlations you were making with Southern California, because when I lived in San Diego, it was coyotes all the time. And I vividly remember that every morning before we would be able to go up onto the playground area, it was essentially a giant dirt volleyball or a giant dirt like kickball area. The maintenance staff had to go around the entire thing and actually dispose or throw back over the fence all of the rattlesnakes that were on the property. Because we lived right next to, it was right next to a canyon. But oftentimes we were also put under lockdown because the rattlesnakes had actually found their way into the buildings. So it was just, it's really interesting how you're correlating all of it, and it is actually making me think of how I'm living here in North Carolina, because over here it's like you have a lot of copperheads. You have a lot of different insects.
Oh yeah. One of the little associations I've sometimes made it's a little interesting is the relationship between the hawk and the serpent, and you actually see on the Mexican flag. One could easily make that serpent into a variety of different kinds of serpents. We have quite a bit of different kinds of snakes, not just rattlesnakes. But the rattlesnake in particular here in kind of the southwest, or the far west of the United States, because we do get a lot of golden eagles and hawks and the California eagle that are very majestic, very beautiful, and huge. If you associate the snake with Dionysus and the hawk with Apollo, which he's often associated, the eagle tends to be more associated with Zeus, though sometimes there's a corollary, largely because Apollo was sort of viewed as one of the most cherished sons of Zeus. But that correlation is very interesting because in Greek religion, the Apollo kind of had the beginning of the year. He had from spring to kind of late summer, and then in from kind of as summer progresses into autumn and into winter, Dionysus kind of has the year in Delphi, the sort of part of ancient Greece that was associated largely with the oracles, mysticism, and a lot of the mystery traditions. So seeing that sort of interpolation between the two and their sort of rivalry with one another is very interesting, particularly because if you look at serpents and hawks, they sort of share a lot of the same prey species. A lot of them are hunting, small rodents and birds and things like that. I find it really interesting to find natural analogs to some of these mythological things.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like the idea that history repeats itself, but it's like not just history. It's like nature repeats itself too.
Yeah. One of the most basic forms of divination that exists historically that we have evidence of is the reading of omens, particularly those of animal omens. Those, both the associations of particular animals to particular deities, but also certain themes that you would see in nature that have very abstract, symbolic kind of representations of things. The Romans and the Celts particularly were very much about reading the flights of birds, the way they fly and what direction they fly and what the bird looks like in flight has certain associations with different themes that they may have associated in a variety of different ways. And there are modern examples of people who have tried to sort of create their own method using that basic idea. Some, of course, though, are a little more unseemly, like the reading of entrails.
Yeah.
It's not something you can always do unless you're, on a farm and have livestock at your disposal.
That would also just be very awkward to just be standing in the middle of the road looking at some roadkill. Attempting to discern meaning.
Yeah. That kind of I don't know what you think, Abern, if you're listening, but that almost sounds like a chaos magic method of divination. Reading random roadkill. But what do I know? Yeah, you having sound issues there?
No, if you can hear me now, I guess I'm okay. I didn't notice my mic was open.
No, you're good.
Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you. So what do you think? Roadkill magic?
I'm sure someone's done it. I don't think it's for me. I find the idea.
It's just your thing, man. Freaking dudism. Yeah, that's a thing. Actually, a really good method of divination that you see from the Celts and you see repeated, particularly in indigenous shamanic cultures, is a form of omen reading that's associated with sensory deprivation. A lot of times a shaman or a mystic would get to a place that's very, very quiet, whether indoors or outdoors. It really works if it's indoors. And you put a blanket or cloth over yourself and get into a sort of ecstatic or trance state, a more inhibitory trance state, where you're completely isolated from the external environment. And then once you get to a sufficient point where you're effectively in a sort of silence, you undrape yourself from the cloth and enter outside. If you're outside when you're doing this, if you have that grade of control, then as soon as you open the cloth and you're exposed to the external environment, you observe the most immediate thing that is in your presence. If a bird flies overhead, or a little serpent goes next to you, or you see a particular tree that just pops out at you, maybe it's moving in the wind at that particular moment when you view it, that's the message that you're supposed to receive.
See, I just want to do that. I find it really interesting.
Oh, it really is, and it's particularly useful because there's elements of that exist all the time. For instance, you're running errands, driving around, getting groceries or whatever, or you're kind of lost in the shuffle, whatever you're doing. You're at work or whatever the case may be. In a lot of instances, you're kind of just going along, doing your own thing. You're not really paying attention to anything in particular. When an omen comes to you, you've sort of been engaged. You've sort of been, what would be another term, activated. You've been activated by a particular message that's very particular. And in almost all the other instances when I've been able to receive some kind of omen like that, it's always been very weird. Like, why is this on the ground? This is very strange.
You mean like you're
all at this very particular moment was there a piece of graffiti right here, right where I'm stepping? So.
Why is there an olive tree next to a dumpster?
Exactly. It's still doing pretty well, by the way. I've been watering it every morning and every evening. So leaves are still green. There's no scaling on the bark. It's real small, It's long. It's a pretty long stem because it had one of those branches to help it grow up. But yeah, I'm excited to see how the olive tree will do in the future. They grow pretty slow. They don't even start fruiting most olive trees till their second or third year. Sometimes as late as the fifth year. But I think it'll be cool to have a nice small olive tree out there, and years and years in the future, if it really gets big, then I might give it to somebody as a gift, or who knows, maybe by that time I might have like a townhouse, or I might have a place where I have my own dirt patch and I can plant it in the ground.
What does the olives and the olive tree signify to you?
Purity. For me, it's purity. The olive is rooted in the word for oil. That's basically what it is. When you really think about it, olive is basically an oil tree. So there's a very distinct and old association with the olive tree and olive oil. That it's one of its most primary purposes was the production of olive oil. And they sort of saw it, many ancient cultures, the Greeks, the Canaanites, the Egyptians particularly, saw the olive tree almost in a sense of the panacea. I'm never sure of the emphasis on that one, but a sort of cure-all. You can use it for cooking oil. You can use it for your skin and hair. Olive oil is an excellent sort of treatment for a lot of different things, and it's if I remember right, it actually has antiseptic qualities as well. So yes, I associate it with purity.
Mm. Is that where the virgin oil, is there anything to that as well?
Yeah, it's pure purity. If that makes sense. It's refined. Right. So, welcome, Isa. But I'm also thinking, because I had been thinking about getting plants out for my nice little outdoor kind of apartment patio for a while, and the olive tree was just this nice like blessing. Okay, you can start now. Put some plants out there. But I want to make good on it and continue. So I'm thinking I'm going to start slowly collecting succulents. Succulents do really, really well in California, and they're very pretty. There's this one called the Aeonium zericuleum, and what it is, it's a succulent plant. Its branch is this weird looking, it almost looks like it has eyes on it. And then when you get to the top of it, it looks like a flower. Like the ones that I like, they're black, like this deep, dark purple leaves that are in like a floret. So a lot of times when you get them, there are multiple branches with these, they look like these giant kind of flower structures. They're really, really pretty. Another one they have out here, it has succulent leaves and tiny little red actual flowers on it that are like this really bright color red, and they grow really, really well here. But you know, I could also potentially grow herbs. The section that I have in the patio, it's partially uncovered, but there's a section of almost a good 3 feet as you exit through the sliding door that's completely covered. So in that section and kind of in the little corner here in the back, I could kind of cluster some plants in that corner that will still get a lot of sun, but will be completely covered from the elements if I'm worried about them, you know, about the rains and stuff. But most of the year I won't even have to worry about rain, so I could probably just keep them out completely uncovered. I get a lot of diffused light because there's a lot of trees in this complex, a lot of pine trees and oak trees and stuff like that. So it's perfect setting for it. So, Isa, we were just kind of talking about a variety of different things. We just kind of started talking about kind of looking at your local flora and fauna in your area and making sorts of associations with your own sort of traditions, particularly with the associations that are commonly made to particular deities. I made the association that though Dionysus is normally associated with the leopard, in my area we get a lot of mountain lions, and I think mountain lion is an excellent analog. And another one I mentioned was that, you know, for Anubis, I could make the association with the coyote if I was so inclined. So. Makes me wonder if there's somebody right now in Australia that made that association with the dingo. You know, like the dingo and the I mean the jackals and dingoes are they're really similar, much more so than coyotes. So I wonder. Welcome, Joshua. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kevin. I'm just doing all right today. How are you?
Great, thank you. Kind of talking about a bunch of stuff. Not anything really in particular. Yeah.
Okay, now that I figured out how to do this on my phone, because I'm awesome like that, yeah, I actually have a white husky that I use for my association with Enepu as well as Set. because Lord knows what the Sedian actual animal was. So I use my white husky because A, it's my familiar and it's easily accessible, and B, it kind of looks like a jackal.
Yeah, I've always wondered what that was, what the animal they used for the head of Set. It's not really a. It's got to be something that existed a long time ago. You know, sort of like went the way of the dodo bird, that kind of thing. It just kind of went extinct. But I don't know. It does kind of look very canine. Or you know what I personally have associated, though I don't know if it's native. Kind of reminds me of an aardvark. The head of Set kind of reminds me a little bit of an aardvark. It's got that very elongated proboscis, but the ears, I don't know if that's like a style choice, but it kind of reminds me of an aardvark.
There are numerous prevailing theories as to what the Sedian animal actually is. Aardvark is actually in that, so I mean that's not far off.
Where are the aardvarks native to anyway? Aardvark. Oh Google, all-knowing Google, tell me, where is it? Oh wow. Okay, so it is a nocturnal mammal native to Africa. And it does have those big long ears.
Yeah, and they're kind of squarish, which is what Set's known for. Actually, that's like if people just see the heads and they're badly drawn heads, a lot of people associate Set and the Nipu together. So like the square ears are kind of what gives Set away from the face. And then like if you see them from a side view, his forked tail is the one that gives it away. I've yet to find an animal that has that weird forked tail thing going on for it, but the square ears definitely help.
What are the other animals that they say it might be associated with? I'm curious. You still there, Isabessa?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, my phone hates me currently, and my kid's upstairs sleeping in my bedroom, so I can't go get my laptop. So I'm playing like message board in between doing this call. The aardvark is one. The African dingo is one. There is a canis, but they're not quite sure what canis family it's from, because they've died out. But they did find a skeleton in like Central Africa and kind of through northern, but yet to Egypt. There's that prevailing theory. There's also a theory which is fairly new and odd, and I don't remember what the animal's actually called. But when I get my laptop after Elizabeth falls asleep, I'll find a picture of it and then figure out what it is. The other thing that I'm thankful for around here is that I use Hathor a lot, and Hathor's go-to animal is a cow. And seeing as how I live in the Midwest, I am never at a loss for a cow.
Yeah, and then there's some ones that are a little harder, like Khnum. I don't know what the actual Egyptian word for that deity is. The one that has the sort of almost ram type horns, kind of come down in a weird spiral pattern.
Yeah, that's a ram. We don't really have rams, but we have a lot of bulls around here, and we have a lot of livestock. So basically, if it's like a cow, a goat, anything from the bull family, really. If it goes on the farm, pigs. We have a lot of pigs. which kind of helps with Bess, even though Bess is like technically, oh god, what's the English word? I'm gonna call him minion because I don't remember what the English word is. The little ones. Anyways, they remind me of little gnomes.
They do.
Yeah, I don't remember. Anyways, I forgot what I was gonna say. Anyway, pigs. That's what I was going with. Even though Bess has like a human form that's a gnome, I use pigs for his association because it's readily available and easy.
Yeah. And then Toth is the ibis, or is it?
Yeah, the ibis bird.
We have something like that in the States. I don't know if it's the exact ibis, but it's in the same family. I remember.
I use the Egyptian Nordis binu, which translates roughly to stork, kind of. So we have a lot of blue herrings here, so I use blue herrings because they're about as close to the ibis as you're gonna get.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Isn't there a deity associated with the hippo?
A deity associated with what?
The hippo, the hippopotamus.
Yes, there is, and my mythology is terrible right now. Yes, there is, and it's female. Hoppy, there it is.
Hoppy,
I knew I was going to come into it.
What? Hippos are like an offshoot of if I remember right, they're an offshoot of an animal that eventually became like all horses and like a lot of other forms of livestock, if I remember right. Yeah, they kind of are, Ruben. I actually found this funny image of it was a joke poster for Hungry Hungry Hippos, and it shows this angry hippopotamus with his mouth open, and it was something like they're hungry, they're coming for you, or something like that. And I sent that to Clayton when he was in Africa on his Facebook because he said he saw a bunch of hippos. So that's kind of me.
I kind of do that. I have a whole bunch of like crocodile and alligator stuff because that's what a met is an alligator. And so I have a big poster in my house that says, "Tread carefully, I'll feed you to a met," which I find entertaining, but no one else does.
You need to get one of those like lifelike statues, like maybe out of resin or whatever, that looks like a giant alligator with its mouth open, and like put that at your front door. Your guests will love you.
That instantly reminds me of the giant crocodile clock from the movie Hook. That's all I can think of in this moment is, just acting as your grandfather clock in your foyer as you enter your home is this giant crocodile clock.
I have a life-size Nipu that my sister got me because that's her primary is a Nipu. So I have a 6-foot Nipu at my house, but I really want a Namet and no one will get me one.
Why not? Too scary?
It's a totally normal house decoration.
Yes, it is.
For a Kemetic, that's absolutely natural to have life-size statues and crazy things in your house. That's totally normal.
I should get a statue of Pan, a seated Pan with the little panpipes, like saying hello to my guests. That'd be good. I should totally do that.
I don't have a large one, but I do have a seated Sekhmet that's on the altar that is facing towards the door to exit. And so, like, everyone usually, like, leaves little things to Sekhmet before they leave.
That's probably a good idea. She can be very protective, but she can also be very, very angry.
I think that's why I like Sekhmet so much, is because when I started out being pagan and pantheist, I started out with Kali. And Sekhmet and Kali remind me a lot of each other. And so yeah, I love Kali and I love Sekhmet, so I just like leaving Sekhmet. And Sekhmet had a huge following in pre-dynastic times, so, and even all throughout New Kingdom, even though they butchered the gods, but we're not going to talk about it.
Is it wrong that I want to see an Indian black metal band with a female lead singer who's dressed like Kali?
I would pay lots of money to see that, so no.
I concur.
The tongue, like straight up like Gene Simmons style, like. Oh man. It also reminds me of the music video for Engel by Rammstein. They have this really seductive, like a black chick on there, and she has this like serpent, like coiling around her. It's like, whoa, that's some freaky ass shit.
I can't do that. That's the Pep incarnate. That's all kinds of bad juju. Oh my gosh. Okay, so totally on the like scale of random shit that I see that's hilarious. So earlier someone tagged me in a thing on Facebook that has the weighing of the heart, and Nippo says, "Oh, I thought you said this. Weigh the gram, bro. That's against the 42 laws of Ma'at."
Nice. Very good. A little ridiculous, but very good.
Terribly tasted memes make me laugh, so whatever.
No, you should. You should have a little bit of fun about that. Like, I think like a lot of the hang-ups that certain cultures have with depictions of deity, particularly ones that are more artistic or even satirical, they just didn't exist. I mean, obviously the Greeks, they had tragedies, and they would sort of have a little fun with different mythologies, sometimes for actual purposes, maybe criticizing people who took things a little bit too seriously. But like, I ended up watching this video some time ago, and it was like a mini series, and there were actors from India who were actually doing a lot of the stories. Like, I think some of it was actually from the Vedas. It might have also been from the Bhagavad Gita. But they were dressed up like, you know, Vishnu, and they had one kid who was dressed up as a young Ganesh. They had one. The kid was dressed as Ganesh. They had a. I think they had. Is it Sati? I always screw up the names. So, but yeah. So I don't think that a lot of these early cultures had those sorts of hang-ups. They definitely wouldn't have been bombing comics for making representations of them.
I think I'm at the point where I just kind of take everything with a grain of salt, because we're so interconnected at this point through social media that everybody has an opinion, and it's not really filtered any longer. Like before, you know, you had to go through venues to get your voice heard. Anymore, like, if you feel like talking about your ass, you can go on Facebook and just rant about it until you run out of characters. So, as far as it comes to like religion and people judging religions that they don't necessarily understand, like, I just have to laugh anymore, because at least they're like trying to poke fun at something. So I guess I'm gonna give them props for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Kevin, are you still on YouTube? Do you still have a channel? Because I can't find you on my subscriptions anymore.
No, I don't still have a channel. My thing is with YouTube, a lot of what I see in YouTube is I have nothing really valuable to say, so I'm going to shit on everyone who makes a video. Seriously. YouTube seems to collect everybody who has an unverified opinion about somebody else and wants to yell and scream and start shit. I don't really want any part of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of that happens. Do you remember, I don't know whether you remember her, but Anastasia just made her comeback. So
Yeah.
that's going to be interesting.
For sure. I don't know, maybe at some point I might start up a channel again, sort of just kind of state some of my ideas, but a lot of stuff I talk about is kind of available, so I mean, if I was going to make a channel, I'd want it to be about something that, you know, is actually kind of valuable for people to hear, maybe something that isn't just clearly represented in text, you know. I know a couple of Hellenists who do videos on kind of practice, like ways of doing practice, different rituals and stuff, or they'll talk about different virtues or ideas in Hellenic thought, and you know, kind of explaining it, putting it, like kind of paraphrasing it so people can understand it. That might be valuable.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I've had several people write me and be like, "Oh, you should come back," but I don't really feel comfortable. And it's not that it's like I'm trying to hide it, but I don't really feel comfortable in doing rituals in front of everybody else. Like, if I'm in a group with other comedics or other polytheists or whatever, it's not really a big deal because those people kind of understand where the backgrounds come in, where the histories come in, what different things mean, so on and so forth. But I feel weird taking something sacred and kind of like putting it out there for everyone, if that makes sense. I don't know that that makes sense.
No, it totally does. A way you could kind of get around it is giving a sort of, I don't want to say dissertation, but you could describe the structure. Because, I mean, ultimately, we're talking about orthopraxy, you know, describing the general framework. And that could give people a sort of guiding point for doing the constructions themselves. Like, here's a general idea of how it should be structured. First, you start with this. Use your purification, this or that or whatever. You do this. You state this. Here's the introduction. Here's some things that you could do as well. You could add it in. Here's step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, and so on. And then, you know, after that, you could state some more addendums to that. Like, some people think that it might be better to do this, or maybe you could do that. You could switch, you know, step 3 with step 4, or swap them, or, you know, add an extra step here if you feel that this is more necessary, and kind of describe it. You wouldn't necessarily be filming yourself doing that, because I totally get where you're getting at. You don't want to kind of put that out there like that, and a lot of people feel that way. But I mean, there's different things you could kind of do as representations, just depending on how you feel about things. And I think a large part is kind of what I was describing too. Is it just seems like you have a bunch of people with doc accounts who have no face, who have no identity, who just have a problem with things and want to say stuff just because. If you go on YouTube, almost anything that has even a small smidgen of controversy to it, there's going to be some crazy dude with tinfoil sitting in his basement who wants to yell and scream that you're a part of the Illuminati or something crazy.
I get that already. Like, I haven't put a video up in 3 years, and I still get people that are on my, like, account that are like, "Oh, the gypsy." I'm like, I haven't even said anything in 3 years. Like, what the hell are you mad about?
Yeah. But there are other options too. There are other video sites. Vimeo is one of them. There's trying to think of this other one. Dailymotion, I think, is another one. That's also a video site. You could do that. I mean, if you could find an alternative one that's a little more locked down, maybe, or you could even do it privately, or kind of distribute your videos through another source of channel, kind of relegated a little bit. But I mean, it's totally up to you what you'd want to do.
It's gonna be one of those things where I just have to like sit down and actually decide like whether or not A, I'm gonna do it, B, whether I have enough time to edit all that crap, because God, editing sucks. And all that good fun stuff.
Definitely. How's everybody else doing? Everything good?
I'm doing pretty good myself.
Cool.
I still was a little distracted with everything around me,
Gotcha.
but enjoying listening.
Good.
But I got other things I'm thinking about, so it's kind of hard to come up with my own things to add.
I gotcha.
But I'm glad you can hear me, because that's an improvement.
So, what did you think of that that kind of cool, like animated or drawn out basic manual of chaos magic that I found? I sent you on Facebook.
I haven't looked at it yet, but I will. I will eventually. I'll let you know when I have given it a look.
It's not super long. It's like a couple. It's like a couple panels, probably. I think it's like 6 or 7 panels or something like that. It might be more.
Okay. Maybe I'll kick it up here pretty soon.
So. Did you move to a different device, Lisa?
Yeah, I went and made sure that the child was passed out and then grabbed the laptop.
Very good. Cool thing about this is about the Google Hangouts is that you can leave, and it'll stay up on your Hangouts queue, and you can just jump right back in. It's easier to switch from devices. I mean, I remember with the old Stickam website, it was a bitch and a half to get back into the Hangout again or into the chat room. And sometimes it would be a thing where like somebody didn't like you and they would ban you from it. Like you barely managed to get in because that one jerk was in there, and you couldn't get back in if you switched out, or even if you just lost connection. So seems to be a little bit less trauma in these Hangouts.
Yeah, that's one thing that I kind of enjoy because Stickam was a pain in the ass, and then you had to wait for it to load, and then it would kick you out. It was fucking annoying as shit. So thankfully, Google's like, oh no, we'll just hold your spot because we want us to use, we want you to use the monopoly that is Google.
I remember one time in Stickam, I was invited on a panel discussion. There was 4 of us discussing, one person pretty much leading the questions and being the moderator. And I could not convince the people at that panel that I was going to be one of the speakers. It was just like, I didn't know how to take that. I felt a little hurt. They're like, can you get off, we need to get the speakers up. I'm like, I'm one of them. Like, sure you are. Can you move along? But that was probably one of the funnest discussions I had, though. So that was pretty good.
I'm really glad that they actually got to make this one because I've been in and out of the hospital for like a week and a half. So like I'm on and then I have to like go to the hospital. Then I'm on and then so I was like, all right, I'm not allowed to die for like the next 24 hours, okay?
You haven't been well?
Basically, I've become a sticking board for all kinds of shit. They're not really sure what's wrong with me, but I've had more blood drawn in the past month than I'm pretty sure my body has had time to recoup. I think, let's see, they ran 8 tests this week, they ran 12 tests last week, and then they took about 1.5 gallons of blood last month over the entire month. So basically they just like drawing my blood and playing with it, I guess.
Yeah. That was basically how I was before I came over to visit you. And I was still kind of shaky by the time I saw you. But yeah, now all I don't do is sleep. So I don't know. I guess that's normal.
Yeah, I don't really do that either. And when I do, I sleep for like God's awful amount of time. Like the other day I fell asleep and I slept for like 36 hours straight. Like I didn't even eat. Like I just slept the whole time.
It's all that blood loss.
I think I need to reevaluate my diet as well, but I'll do that when I'm old.
Yeah, it probably was the blood loss. And I can't take medication. Most medication gives me an allergic reaction. Pretty much if it's man-made, it probably reacts to me. So they get to draw all kinds of blood, make me pass out. I spend lots of time in the ER, and they can't give me any painkillers. It's great fun.
Yeah, I have a problem with some of the antibiotics. They cause my nerves to deaden and me unable to move my extremities. But other than that, I haven't found anything I really have a bad reaction to.
I just have to check all of them to make sure that I'm not allergic to the binder agent in most medications.
Yeah. For me, it was definitely the active ingredient and the one that we had, because everything in that family kind of did it to me, but they got me on an unrelated antibiotic and I was fine. But it would basically, depending on how bad I reacted, I would either have, like, my legs were always asleep, like you had been sitting on them for a while and you cut off the circulation, or if it got really bad, like I couldn't move my leg at all. And it was scary the first time it happened, but by the time it happened the second time, I knew it wasn't going to be permanent, so it wasn't nearly as frightening. But we got to the bottom of it and found out that was the cause. Almost seems like I'm going to have to come up with something to talk about, huh? I was totally unprepared.
You mean you didn't bring your notes?
Didn't bring my notes? I didn't know I was going to have to liven this party up, but I don't know.
It's your responsibility to get your PowerPoint presentation set up. It was on the syllabus.
Christopher, you already know that the chaos pantheist is always needed to liven it up. I mean, really, you have a comedic and a Hellenist. Like, we're not going to do shit. We're just going to look at you.
I wish I still had the PowerPoint presentation I gave at when I was a member of the Paradise Valley Grove, I think, the Druid Grove that I was a member of in Pullman. That was an awesome PowerPoint presentation. That was probably better than any of them I ever did for school. But I guess go ahead.
I actually had an interesting experience with this from the sort of teaching perspective. It didn't end up working out with the group because I kind of just felt like I was the odd man out. and it's particularly the case when you're around a lot of eclectics. And well, okay, so I had joined. Well, I kind of started up a small group for a while, trying to see if I could get some interest, and a lot of people were a bit further out. So it was a little more towards the Inland Empire, a little less towards LA. And the guy who joined up was a part of a sort of, I don't know if it would be ecumenical, but it was a sort of witchcraft interfaith kind of group called the Covenant of the Goddess. And they have quite a few out here apparently in Southern California. And this guy ran classes and a bunch of stuff. He had like a sort of study group and a bunch of things. And he said, you know, he knew I was a Hellenist. I described my tradition. And his path was a little more Roman influence, sort of seemed to be almost like a Shregan kind of Wicca type dealy. And he wanted me to do a ritual. So I did a Numenia ritual, the standard kind of beginning of the month kind of ritual for ancient Greek religion. And I came out there, and I had everything set up. I brought like a folding table and everything, and he put in a cloth and everything. I had all my ingredients, and I had it set up. I like to usually put my ritual stuff into a folder with those little those plastic kind of insert kind of things. You put the paper in there, and I usually would print it out and stuff like that. So that's what I was doing at the time. Now I actually write it by hand and put it in a leather journal as a sort of like hymnal. Yeah, basically like that. Mine was a little thinner, but yeah, it was basically like that. So I had it up, and one hand here, the other hand here, to kind of do everything. And I ran the ritual. I still have the ritual I used. Very cool. And so the way it was set up is they would kind of stand around and they would listen to me do it, and I would pour out the glasses. They would all do the libations and everything, pour it into the bowl, drink, pour it into the bowl. And everybody actually was like impressed with it. They really thought it was cool to see something totally different than what they were used to. And they all said that they could really kind of feel a really good vibe, and they thought that I spoke really well when I was doing it. Funny thing happened, though, after we were done. Okay? Right after I ceased the ritual and put out the fire, because they actually had like a pit for me to use, which is really cool. I actually had like a fire pit to drop the frankincense into. Right after I was done, the last word I said, the wind started to blow, and all of the cats from the house came outside, and they were looking around like, what just happened? It's weird, because it was a bunch of like witches, and like the head guy and his wife were like really big into like the witchcraft kind of thing, and they all had like a bunch of familiars basically. So they all came outside and were just wandering around like I was cooking something really good, or like I had cat food. They were just out and about like, this is really weird. So they all thought that was really weird. They all looked at me like, what did you do?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I named my my wonderful little folder in that wonderful ransom type where you just cut out all the letters from whatever you find and taped them on there. I was like, that fits me so perfect.
Yes, it does. It's very, very ransom oriented. You're holding magic at ransom.
Yeah, it's just creepy enough.
just a smidgen.
The sad thing is though, it used to all zip up, but the zipper broke on it. So
yeah, we might want to switch it over to something.
I don't know if I want to replace it, or if like I want to build like a frame around it and put it on a wall or something. But I've had it for quite a while.
Kevin, you have to understand, Christopher doesn't get rid of anything until it's done.
Okay, so this is what I did for mine, since my tradition's more devotional than magical. Though I do have some like journals of different ideas. I got this nice leather journal. It's got one of those things it actually has a little like piece of leather that actually goes into a little slot, so I can actually open it up. and close it. And what I did is it has lines in it because I don't draw correctly. So I wrote basically for the first, like, I think it was almost 10 pages, I hand wrote every hymn that I use for my standard rituals. And I'll probably keep going and writing more as my path expands. And I may also start writing my own custom hymns in there as well. Maybe have a whole section for custom hymns. But the line journal thing is good because it's really small. You know, it's really easy to kind of to take with you.
Yeah. My best friend, he has something that's a similar size to that. And yeah, we each we picked names that fit our personalities. Mine's called the Abysmal Almagest, or the Abysmal Almagest, and his is the Book of Awesome.
No.
That's very Robert. I feel bad because apparently I just like to be over the top because I have an 11 by 17 bounds, like crazy colored. It's not really crazy colors. It's blue, silver, purple, and a few other colors. I have that one, and then I have a red one, and then I have a temple notebook, and then by notebook I mean a huge binder that has like a billion pages, and then I have each of the books that are dedicated to each of the gods that I serve. I apparently just like to be over the top, so there's that.
Yeah.
I have about two. I have one that I put in, you know, kind of like my my spells and, you know, the different things, and that one is just kind of like yours, Kevin. It's a leather bound lined notebook, and it just helps me because I hate not writing in a straight line. It's my OCD kicking in. So I do that for that, and then I have one that's actually a pewter type like notebook. It's like really heavy, and inside that, and it has dragons all over it, because I'm kind of obsessed with them. So that's where I put like all of kind of the like rituals and stuff, like, you know, more magical oriented stuff in that one.
Yeah. I've thought about doing that as well. My path is less magically focused, though I do have mysticism. I mean, it's sort of integral to my path currently, but there are times that I've done magia, so I'll probably write some stuff in that. I actually created a single implement that I use, a very simple wand. What it is I took a birch dowel that I got at the hardware store, cut it out, and the tip, what I did is I carved it with I have this nice buck knife that I use for carving, and I carved it to this rounded tip, and then got 3 different types of grit sandpaper and just sanded it down nice and smooth and clean all the way around. So it's just a single implement that I would use for that specific kind of ritual. I don't need anything else. For basic Greek folk magic, you don't need anything else. There's no antime or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of create that stuff from scratch mostly. Welcome back, Frank.
Thanks.
And it is very true that I hardly throw anything away, and that a lot of my stuff is more duct tape and solder than it is whatever it originally was.
You know, it'd be something kind of cool you could do to sort of reflect the style of tradition that you have. That's very much a sort of pirated kind of path, meta-paradigmal. Is that you could make a journal that's a patchwork of different pieces of cloth, different kinds of, even maybe different types of paper, potentially, and kind of all stitch them together. And that would be really interesting because you could collect different kinds of fabric representing different things and different aspects that you could make it very personal for yourself. Like a mosaic.
If you choose to do that, I'm just saying I have a giant sewing machine and like 1,000,000,005 pieces of fabric lying around my house.
There's really cool things you can do with a standard book. You can make book covers for pretty much everything.
And if I leave now, it only takes me 23.5 hours to get to you.
It's totally worth it though, because it's me. I mean,
Actually, last week I was really tempted to drive all the way up there and then just like show up when I got to the state line and be like, "Hey, you're probably at work, but you should totally leave."
yeah. Yeah, if you came that far, I could pretend I was sick, I think. That's quite a distance to travel. And when I walk away, I can still hear I'm on a wireless headset, so
Gotcha.
I will catch it.
So because you have an olive tree, I went out to try to find out whether I could make papyrus grow in the temperature that I live in. It doesn't work very well, but goddammit, I'm gonna try it.
Okay.
We'll see
What
how it
what are the temperature, light, and humidity requirements of papyri?
I'd have to look it back up again, but I mean, you're looking at upper crust Egypt, so I mean, it's gonna be hot and arid most of the year, except for when the Nile floods, and then it's gonna be silt. But I live in a temperature range where every day is different, and you could be -5 degrees today and be 56 degrees tomorrow, and that's normal.
What's your living situation?
I live in a condominium.
Okay.
Whatever that word.
Decent. Do you have decent insulation?
It's fairly decent. I mean, I can grow lotus inside, so I mean.
Okay. All right. Well, something you could potentially do if you want to spend a little more effort is find out a good way of growing in a pot. I mean, if you really want to educate yourself, you could even do it hydroponically. Doing hydroponics is not that difficult. I did it in 6th grade with tomato plants. So I did it as a science project. They didn't even know what to think. They had to give me 2 A+. But anyway, so you could get UV bulbs. You know, I was raising reptiles at the time, so they have UVA, UVB bulbs that are fairly efficient. There's different setups you can get. There's ones that like it's totally articulated and it can go in and around the plant. There's even ones you could get like a floor lamp and set it in there. They also have ones that clip onto something depending on how you grew it. I would say that if it's you know, a desert plant like that, you would have to simulate natural light. And a lot of those too, you could even set that on a timer. So it would give it a full day's sun, and you would shut it off. You would plug the timer into the device, and it literally looks like this giant timer. And you could have settings. You could set it up for 12 hours or 16 hours or however long, and then you could potentially grow it inside. The only thing with a plant that's grown inside is once you grow it inside that long, particularly if you grow it with like grow lamps and stuff like that and controlled humidity, you would probably have to mist it quite a bit. Once you grow it inside, it can almost never go outside again. It's adapted to your indoor climate. So, like when I moved my tomato plant from the indoor thing that I had to outdoors, it wilted and it stunted and stopped growing. But I was basically growing a dwarf plant because I had it stuck in small pots. So these normal tomato plants became almost like cherry tomatoes. was really interesting. It fruited quite a bit, but it was restricted to that size. It depends on the plant. It depends on what you do. But if you really wanted to go papyrus, you should look into it. See if there's anybody who's doing indoor growing with like grow bulbs and stuff like that.
Hello, guys.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey, what's up going on?
Greetings.
We've been talking about a little bit of everything. Mythology, animal associations for your local environment, for gods that are not associated with where you live in the States. Different forms of divination, different religious concepts, orthopraxy, orthodoxy, orthopathy, and just kind of a little bit of everything.
Lots of ortho-y.
A lot of ortho. Well, that was kind of in the beginning. It kind of was just to kind of get the ball rolling. But I was telling them that I got an olive plant, and they've all kind of known about it for a little bit. And Isa was saying that she's considering trying to grow papyrus, but she lives in a temperate climate, Midwestern climate, so she would probably have to grow it indoors. I was saying she could probably grow it indoors.
Sounds like an environment would have to be created.
Yeah, she'd have to get grow bulbs and probably have to give proper humidity and pay attention to what the nutrient value of the soil she's using, or do full hydroponic.
By the way, I got a new microphone.
Great.
And I don't really know how this thing works. There should be echo coming, but it's got like this weird echo canceling technology on it. So if there is echo coming in, let me know.
Okay, you sound good thus far, so we'll see how it goes.
Sound clear?
I think like if I grow papyri, it would make it easier though, because right now I ship everything from Cairo to make papyri paper, which takes a lot of goddamn time and effort. So I mean, if I can grow it myself and strip it myself, it cuts out the middleman, the shipping, the customs, all that good fun crap.
I typed in growing papyrus into Google, and it put growing papyrus indoors, plant indoors, in containers, in a pond in Florida.
It can be done.
You just have to move to do it.
Yeah. Because the last one in the queue on Google is what you're supposed to do. Apparently there's a plant called the dwarf papyrus, Cyperus papyrus, or Cyperus, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert.
Hey, Sarah, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Looking at my stuff for my masters.
Yay.
Yay.
Masters are fun.
$10-page paper, 2 days, no problem.
That's what coffee's for.
Clearly, totally not doing it right now.
Oh, you're all over it, I can tell.
Yeah, you could do it. You can knock it out in one day.
The English major will come through eventually.
Oh, English. Ooh.
Well, my undergrad was in English. My master's is in education.
That's fun.
Okay, well then I apologize ahead of time for my horrific English and the errors in grammar ahead of time.
It's totally cool.
That's what I went to school first for, but I found out that I wasn't very good at the English language, and the sad thing is it's the only one I speak fluently, so I had to cut my losses and try something else.
I'm paying off school, at least what I owe already, so I can go back to med school, so that'll be fun.
Hey, I do financial aid. I can always help you there.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I'm not going to pay the stuff back, because I'm going for my doctorate, so my plan is just to stay in school forever.
I wish I could do that. That'd be like the greatest job ever.
Yeah. Just being a professional student.
Yes.
Dude, I would love to be a professional student, but that's not quite how it works.
Yeah, the problem is I'm a professional student and working. I just want to be a professional student. So it doesn't work that.
What are you getting your doctorate in? Because I'm a nosy bee.
Clinical psychology.
That's awesome. I love that class. In fact, I've taken it like 12 times just because I like taking it. I'm like, no, I'm just going to take this class again. I already have the credit, but man, I can be an extra.
Well, there's a thing called CourseNet. They're free classes online, and you get not credit for it, but you probably get CEs or CEUs, but they're free. And sometimes they're in Harvard, Princeton, or Johns Hopkins, MIT. They're totally free. I can just send you the link.
Yeah, that would be fantastic because I have to have like a billion of those for my med degree because I'm going to school to be a weird doctor. So natural doctor, normal like venues for doctorates and the continued educations don't necessarily work for my doctorate. So that's fun.
Cool. Let me send you the link. Here you go. It's on the side chat.
Fantastic. More stuff for me to do. Who's excited?
I am. I'm excited for you.
So what was the topic before I came rolling in and shut everybody up?
Random miscellaneous shenanigans, basically. I mean, we've talked about a little bit of everything. We've talked about orthodoxy. We've talked about Kevin and his beautiful olive tree that I'm jealous of. We've talked about all kinds of crap.
Yeah, I came a little late, but I was here before for a little bit, but I didn't kind of catch the conversation. But basically, my goal here is just to really listen.
We also talked about spiritual journals of different types and varieties and different components. I was showing them the one that I have that's a lined, leather-bound, journal that I use for all my hymns. And Sarah mentioned a bunch of the ones that she has, and then Aberin showed the one that he has. It's kind of this nice little crazy ransom text thing he has on the side with a bunch of different components to it. So,
Can I see it? No, the cover?
yeah, his cover's pretty neat.
I have a lot of little leather-bound notebooks, but I don't use them for religious purposes.
Yeah.
It's more for my job, but I find that whenever I'm writing, I'm wanting to do something more creative, so I don't really do a religious journal. I tried a few times, and it just, like I have one somewhere around here. It's a nice little leather-bound black book with a strap, but I haven't used it. I just don't find it to be part of my practice.
The notebooks I write in for work are 160 years old, and it's a continuation since the beginning, so that's good, interesting, fun.
Well, mine are from Walmart.
Same.
Hooray for Walmart.
Mine is also from Walmart, and that's probably why it's broken.
If I had to pick a style of journal, it would just be all black. My backpack is black. My notebooks are black. My computer is black. It's just straight up one color. And I do that quite often.
I found a basic kind of description of how you would grow a dwarf papyrus indoors. It talks about how you basically have to keep it constantly moist. It doesn't talk about using any kind of grow lights, but I mean, it's always a good idea with something that usually, at minimum, requires low light. But what it recommends you can do if you don't want to have to just keep watering multiple times a day is get a larger pot and fill it up with water, and then put a slightly smaller pot with the plant in it. And if the water is high enough in the pot that surrounds it, it will constantly give water to the roots. So you would sort of keep it in a semi-aquatic environment.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Well, because I was working with it, like, my grandparents used to do water gardens, and so, like, lotuses I have a lot of experience with, and so I figure papyri and lotuses kind of thrive in the same kind of, like, lifestyle, I guess, because they're both in silty things, like, from the ponds and stuff like that, and they're always covered by, like, so much water, which would be reminiscent of the Nile anyway. Well, before they dammed it up and screwed it all up, but who's counting?
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably, like, I would look into, like, what kind of light, you think you can get. In your climate, there's going to be whole parts of the year that it's going to be very cloudy, and there's not going to be a lot of light, even if it's next to a window. There are some things that suggest on how you would take care of a plant in normal temperate climates. And they actually recommend that you take the plant indoors anyway. So same kind of thing. It's like that you would if you were taking care of like a tortoise. Instead of taking the tortoises indoors and letting them hibernate, you could just keep them indoors all year round with the same heat and light element, so that they would have the same temperature all the time. So the same thing with the plant. You would just get a bulb that has a UVA, UVB. It already produces a decent amount of heat, so you would have heat, light, and moisture that it's used to year-round indoors. You just need to look into what the wattage of the bulb is, how much it uses, and then kind of judge how much you think that you can manage that. But it was saying, like, the house plant will probably be about half the size of its full size. The dwarf plants only get, like, at most 5 or 6 feet tall, whereas, like, the standard papyri get up to 10 feet tall in the wild. This plant is a dwarf; it's half the size. So the house plant would probably be half or 3/4 the size of its normal dwarf size in a house plant. But if you got a good sized pot, indoor pot in the corner, like you would like a ficus or something like that, you could potentially get a 4 or 5 foot plant at some point. It just would take a while to grow that size. And a really good thing about papyrus is it's designed to be trimmed. The oldest part of the plant you would cut off every year. So you would have to do it anyway to keep the plant alive. So you basically have all the paper you would need. Because the older part of the plant is what you would use for the paper anyway. You dry it out. My grandfather was a huge green thumb, and my dad picked up a lot of it, and I picked up a lot of it. So from like age 11 to like age 15, we had gardens out in our yard, and there was a good 2 years period where I was basically taking care of the entire garden. I had a whole system. I learned a whole lot about plants. And with my system, since it would cost me more money in this apartment to raise an animal, plants are the perfect option because I can grow so many different types of plants in pots. I know how to take care of all of them, and it's very relaxing. I mean, they say like watering a plant is very zen. I think there's something to that. I got one of those little, it's kind of like an abstract shape, but I got one of those watering pots that doesn't have a top to it. It's just got that weird kind of spout to it. So it's real easy to control the water with a watering pot. So I figure once I get 5 or 6 little pots outside, some succulents, different things, I'll have like a whole setup of different things to water every morning and every night. I look forward to that.
This is really strange, but I miss raising animals, so like goats and pigs and things like that. Like when I was little, I had a giant pig and its name was Kafka, so like I miss raising pigs. So whenever I get the chance to move out of this condominium, I'm probably gonna just buy land and stack animals on it and call it a goddamn day.
A really good breed, size-wise and usefulness, is the pygmy goat. There's like whole like subcultures around raising these particular types of goats. They're really good with kids. They're not as aggressive. They don't get as big. And pygmy goats can actually be farmed. The female goats you can get milk from them. So and goat cheese, I like goat cheese. It's pretty good stuff. So I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, if I can make it by myself, and I can make it over open fire, then I'm good, because that's how I was raised when I was little.
Yeah. The one that's actually, people like to say it's really easy, but it's not, is chickens. Unless you have the space for it, and the feed and everything else, you have the existing sort of foundation for it. Raising chickens for eggs is actually pretty time-consuming and can be expensive. But I think it's one of those things with pretty much all livestock that it's spending the initial investment to get all the animals set up and cared for. But once it's stable and like, I'll give you an example. Where I live, we're not zoned for livestock. But if you go to the nearest freeway and you go down to where my parents live, about 20 minutes out, there's this area called Norco and Corona, which is right next to it. That's on the border of Temescal Valley as you start getting closer and closer to San Diego. And that area is zoned for livestock. Most of the people that live there are big into the whole horse culture. Like a lot of them have horses and ride and do a lot of that stuff. It's very like country over there, so it's very much sort of rural. And a lot of people there actually raise chickens and goats and pigs and all that kind of stuff because they're zoned for it. So you would just have to figure out what part of your state is really well set up for that when you do, if it becomes a reality for you where you're looking to move. Advantage though, if you're cool with living a little more in a rural area, a lot of the housing is much cheaper. The land is much cheaper. So closer you are to city, the more they raise the sticker price because they think it's prime real estate that everyone wants to live around the cities.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck where I am right now until I get custody of my daughter, but that's a whole nother story. But after that, I'm probably either gonna move to the Northwest or Philadelphia, but that's only because I have family in Philadelphia. But I really actually want to live in Southern Oregon because I'm weird.
No, Oregon is beautiful. They have wonderful seasons. It's very green there.
Like Southern Oregon.
Yeah. Even Northern California is pretty nice when it comes to that. Northern California, Washington, very, very nice landscape.
If you move to Oregon, you should adopt me as a pet. And just like lay on the carpet and hang out all day.
Well, you are a fox, right? Aberrant
yeah,
fox.
I can't find work in that area. I've tried before, so like about all I could do.
I guess I could probably use you outside. And then I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna leave it alone because it's not appropriate for inside the chat room.
He could herd your pygmy goats.
It's perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect. I have to go back home first, otherwise my family will be all weird. Well, my dad's family. I have to go back home.
Is that a necklace you're wearing, amethyst?
Actually, this one is jet. Let me see if I can get it up.
Oh, okay. Thought I saw purple from the distance. Cool. It's very nice. Very ornate. You don't usually see a lot of women wearing larger pendants. Usually they're real small and delicate. So I always like it when I see it. 'Cause I mean, they're really pretty, you know. A little fancy is nice. I remember I was at this swim meet when I was in high school, and one of the parents, she was wearing this really cool teardrop pendant of a tiger's eye. It was really very bright and had a lot of really nice feature to it. And it had one of those like sort of like those ornamentations they put on cut stones, like silver on the tips and kind of around the edges. It was like that. It was really, really pretty. But I've always been a fan of semi-precious stones. I find that a lot of them are prettier than people give them credit. I actually have a couple of silver rings that I've got at the Renaissance Fair. One of them is labradorite, which is kind of these like lots of browns and black and green in it, but it's got like this sort of opalescence to it. It's kind of got an octarine. When the light hits it, it looks like the inside of an abalone shell. It's got that real cool like color to it. And I also have some. I have a couple of pieces of piercings that are made out of stone too, but these are a little too small for my ears. They're made out of solid light. They're like a nice, dark, kind of medium color blue with black flecks. So really pretty stuff. Wood is nice too. Like wood can be really pretty, and particularly with piercings, but you don't really see a lot of wood pendants.
Yeah, I see a lot of, like, I have a lot of gemstones anyway. Like this, you can't see it, because it's the same skin tone. Anyways, that's carnelian, and Then I have, let me grab it, because you'll enjoy it, and probably no one else.
I don't know, maybe.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. This one is actually orange onyx, and it's
Nice.
like the size of my head. And then this is crystal quartz with,
Sweet.
I think it has tourmaline in it, because there are tourmaline flecks here and here. But there's that one. And then this is the other crystal quartz. I have really big crystal quartzes around my house. And then I have, it's too big for me to carry it over here, mainly because it took 2 people to put it down. But I have a big lapis, which is from Afghanistan. And it took me 3 years to get it through customs, so I'm pretty proud of that.
Nice. Let's see. I have a few things. Let me see if I can find it.
That's longer than I ever had to wait to get something through customs. It doesn't feel so bad anymore.
Okay. This one was a gift many years ago from a boyfriend that I dated for about a year. And he gave it to me as a parting gift when we broke up. And it's a beautiful geode.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's got amethyst on the inside. Really, really pretty. Funny thing about geodes is it's kind of a little like life. It's really ugly on the outside, but in the inside there's all this intricate beauty to it. And like I've mentioned before, I go to a lot of Renaissance fairs, so I get a lot of custom stuff made, and I'll probably grab another thing I was going to show you. But this is one of the first things I got. This is a dagger. It's made with Indian jasper. It's like a reddish gray kind of like a flint kind of dagger that's integral into it. It has a point that's been glued in, and the actual handle is made from a type of cacti that grows in like large branches they have out here. And when you get the cacti, it's solid. When it dries out and dies, and then you hone it down, and it becomes like this a real like a strong piece of almost like wood, but it's got really weird flex to it. And he took that and got some leather strapping, dyed it like this kind of yellowish color, and he uses a really high grade glue, like almost like a wood glue, and he gradually, like with a lot of heat and steaming, he actually wraps it around and made a real cool handle to it. So it's got like this kind of squarish like handle thing, so it sits flat on a surface. It's really cool. So it's kind of a decorative piece. But I have used it for other things on occasion, like for costuming and stuff like that. But I usually keep it at home because I don't want it to break. And I'll show you one more thing, my treasured piece from the Renaissance Fair. Be right back. So I have this 6-foot staff. On the base of it is a rubber end. It actually has a strap of leather on it as a sort of washer so that I can just replace this end when it wears down. So obviously the bottom of the stick never gets worn down. It's made out of birch, lightly sanded. It's got a rough texture to it. Still, a lot of the bark is still on it. And what he did is he wrapped it with a green leather with pieces of black cording on the edges. And his staffs are entirely unique because the end of it actually can come off. So if I wanted to just use this as a standard walking stick that doesn't call attention, I just take this off. He's improved his method over the years. So what he did, I went down to his place in Apple Valley. He actually put some leather washers on the ends on both sides so that it's clean. So when I take it off, you have this nice, like, reddish leather thing here. What he uses for the ends of it is a double-threaded screw. It has threading on the inside of the actual staff itself, and the double-headed screw is threaded into the tops that he puts on it. I also have a resin skull that I used before. It's a little chipped. It got a little crazy, but this is made from an antler. I believe this is actually, it's not deer. I think it's actually elk. It's an elk antler. And it's got like this weird brownish color, and the inside is underneath the outer layer of the keratin is white. So like on the edges where he sanded it down, you see this little white flecks on the inside. I wanted a sort of forked staff for a variety of reasons. A lot of old craft traditions, particularly in the Middle Ages, were very big on using the stang as a magical implement. But also I wanted it because I wanted something to reflect Artemis. She's one of the deities who's sacred to me. So, and it has more of that feel of something that you would actually walk with. It's not overly ornate, but it has a real presence. So I've gotten a ton of compliments from this. I'm always giving people his email address so they can, because he does custom work out of his house. He has an eBay store, and he does a bunch of really cool stuff. His whole thing at the fair is a sort of like black market's good kind of thing and weird, strange curios. So he'll make this stuff that looks freaky, like weird monsters, like cryptozoological monsters that don't exist, just from like random stuff. It's really weird though because he's able to score bones from different animals in really weird ways. Because like a lot of research places and laboratories will have excess like bones that they were using for like for schools and things like that, but they don't need them anymore. So it's a sort of thing of like he takes them off their hands for him for like just a little bit of money, and then once he gets through kind of like the customs thing like you were describing, they're his legally. So it's pretty cool stuff. Welcome, Frank.
I'm sure that customs here is a lot easier than getting customs through Egypt, because people in Egypt have become insane about customs. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, shit that you can tell is not authentic in any way, shape, or form. They're like, oh, we're gonna hold it for 6 months. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
I think it's because of this sort of precarious relationship that Egypt has had with antiquities, particularly with Britain and France and Germany, who have taken a lot of, or kept a lot of those sort of things over the years. And, you know, Egypt has had a fight over ownership of these, I guess, national treasures, if you put it to that effect. So I can kind of understand it to a certain extent.
I mean, I understand too, but, I mean, I'm not even an Egyptologist. I mean, I wouldn't class myself as an Egyptologist. But, I mean, you can obviously tell something that was made 3,000 years ago compared to something that was made, you know, 50 years ago, even if it is a really good reproduction. I don't see the point in holding it in customs. I don't. Like, if it processes customs, fucking ship it. Like, it's not that complicated.
Yeah. I was very fortunate because a lot of the statuary that I've gotten they're reproductions, obviously, smaller reproductions of classical pieces, but even still, I was able to get them shipped from Greece from certain websites that were pretty easy. It didn't take very long to get there. I was really surprised the price and the time period it took to get them, and I've never had anything that I got from Europe that was broken or damaged in shipping. They've all been really good about it. What I find is really cool when I get something that's custom made from like somebody's small business. A lot of times I'll get like nice cards that they write on it, like they'll sign it and stuff like that, like thank you for your business and that kind of thing. I've always really liked that, supporting local businesses like that. Put in a lot of time and energy to do that stuff.
I'd like to get the email about this staff guy, or from him.
Oh, Jerry Snap. Yeah, I'll find his. It's in my contacts. I'll find his eBay store too, if I can.
What should I expect?
Huh?
What should I expect as far as price range goes?
His canes run anywhere from $40 to $60. Staves can run anywhere from $60 to $80 usually. If it's really intricate, it could be close to $100, but that's doubtful.
That's about what I expected.
He also does rings and a bunch of like smaller jewelry stuff, and he's a real cool guy. It's really a really cool thing I liked about him at the Renaissance fairs. I like this smaller one better than the larger one. It's cheaper, better people there. I met him from that one in Corona, and he actually has to walk with a cane because he can walk without it, but one of his legs is not working as well as the other, and so he got into making canes and staves. And when somebody will walk in that has like a cane, like maybe an older person that has one of those like cheap metal canes from the hospital or whatever, he'll bring them over and like, hey, you can use one of my canes the whole time you're here, just as like a gesture of goodwill. That is, I have to say, that is a great sales pitch. They see how nice his canes are made, and then it's like if they really do want to buy it, they'll know that they want to buy it. Thought that was cool, but he was just like, he never expects them to buy it, or he never expects anybody to buy anything. And he's given me like cigars and stuff like that when I'm there. So every time I go in there, I bring my tobaccos. I give him like cigars as like thank you for all your years of being a good guy and giving us stuff, and he gives us deals when we go there.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I have that relationship with my soap guy. Like, there's a guy who, his shop actually is from Florida, but he goes to all the Renaissance festivals that I go to, and because I am allergic to so many things, like the natural, like I know everything that's in his soap, in his lotions. I already know what to buy. Like, I'll walk in and he'll already have it like stacked up because I just email him and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be here this weekend. He's like, oh, all right. And like then he'll throw in incense because him and his wife dip incense in essentials. And because I've been buying them so long, they already know like what Egyptian scents I like. And they're just like, oh, here you go. Friggin' fantastic.
Yeah, there's actually a soap guy at the one that the fair that fair I was just talking about, and he's also makes vests and breeches and a bunch of like pretty cool Renaissance stuff. His stuff is slightly more expensive, but still cheaper than the other fair. So I actually got a nice pair of it's like a corduroy type pattern pants. I still have them. They're really well made, and but his soaps are awesome. He comes out with new scents every year. Like there's something different that he throws in, and he still has this like standard like 10 different scents that he has, and they're all like organic soaps made from scratch. So really, really cool stuff in there.
I feel like tonight Interfaith has become pagan because like pretty much everyone up on the thing is pagan.
A lot of us, yeah, most of us. or some variety there.
Rare event.
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Appreciate it while it lasts.
Invites Abrahamics to stir the pot. Hey, I pretend to be Abrahamic sometimes, just because.
Totally invite the Abrahamics. I'm down. I have a room with a bunch of pagans and like 3 Abrahamics.
And then you have to enter with the question, so which angel do you worship? Because that always ends well.
That little conversation on Interfaith has been pretty funny.
Yeah.
That Christianity is polytheistic.
Yeah.
More than they realize, and it's hysterical. Ocean, I really want to steal your trees, just so you know.
Go for it. I stole it from Google Images.
Everything is stolen. Everything's a remix.
But I really like the symbol. When I found it, I was just like, ooh!
Well,
Really? Did you get like all high pitched like that?
I did. I made a funny note. I made that noise.
I can just see you making that noise, actually.
Yeah, it's true. You've probably seen me make that noise.
I have seen you make that noise.
I feel like it would make a really good tattoo, but I'm a little bit wary because it's all over Google Images.
Yeah, same.
Of course, now that I have tattoos, they're all over Google Images because people are assholes.
Yeah, I was wanting to get some tattoos kind of based on ancient Pictish art. And I've yet to find a tattoo artist. I haven't really been looking either, but I'll probably find it at some point soon.
You've wanted to get one, but you're a little too picky.
LOL.
Or picty, if you prefer.
I can
I
picture
see
it
what
in
you
my
did
mind.
there.
Everyone loves a good pun, even if they hate it.
Yeah, I hate it, but I love it. It's alright.
That's okay, I'm still trying to find someone that'll do shadow hieroglyphics on my back, and no one wants to do it because they're all afraid they're gonna screw it up because they're assholes.
That's not nice.
But I have the 2 on my wrist, and those will suffice for now, so we'll go with that.
I've shown you my tattoos before, right, Issa?
I've seen a few of them, yeah.
I only have the 2.
Well, then I've seen them.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
I have to be careful with that because I'll be like, oh yeah, I've seen your tattoos, and then they'll be like, oh, I have like 20 now, and I'm like, oh, I haven't seen all
No,
those.
I haven't gotten any new ones since like 4 years ago. So. Have you seen the motion?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't think Sarah's seen him either. She's still watching.
I am. I'm here, I promise.
All right.
No, she's not. She's a
So,
liar.
Ouroboros?
Oh, what is that?
An Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail.
Oh,
World
cool.
serpent. Yeah.
I have a pentacle with an Ouroboros. It's was the first one that I got when I converted to Wicca.
And the Bulgar cross or the Sun cross.
Cool.
Yeah. I got one. That one was done by. Oh God, what is his name? Rube's Tattoo. He's real well known out here. He's in Arcadia. Tom Tilden. Yeah, Tom Tilden did that tattoo.
I have a similar tattoo. It's right there. Except for mine is for the 4 pathways of shamanistic ways, because I'm half native too. I just didn't want to color it in because putting white on olive skin doesn't really go well. So I was like, no, I'm just gonna do the outline because I'm cool like that.
I picked a theme. All my tattoos are mythological and they're all grayscale. So any other tattoo that I get from this point on will be grayscale. It's all going to be the same thing.
I will be getting blue.
Nice.
For obvious goddamn reasons.
My buddy actually, because he's more Norse influence and kind of Norse Gale in his sort of path, so all of his are blue as well, like a blue woad. He has a custom bind rune that he made using the 3 initials of his name. That's on the inside of his arm here. Then he got this cool. It's kind of like a knotwork, like a knotwork band, but instead of being the standard like loopy knotwork, it's pointed, kind of like how a lot of like more Germanic style motifs tend to be. So it's this like kind of like template around his arm, and then on his other arm, he got the Helm of Awe in blue, same colors.
Helm of Awe is a good one.
Yeah. So that he's kind of in the same boat where he's like specific theme, specific color set. I would say that it's kind of the same. Like if you get multicolor, stick to multicolor. Like if you're going to get a bunch of different colored tattoos that are all vibrant, that a good way to do it is to have them all to be multicolored, have a sort of mosaic. Because as soon as you get all color tattoos and then you decide one day to get grayscale or sepia, then it kind of is a little off-putting sometimes. Unless you're like really, really eclectic with your tattoos. But there's this lady at the fair that Tim and I know. Her name's Rita, and she has this beautiful flower like right here on her chest next to her arm, and it's sepia. It's like she's very light-skinned. She's Finnish, so the sepia is like this really. It blends into her skin like really, really cool.
Yeah, mine are supposed to be sepia, but when they started to ink it, my skin tone was like, oh, I'm just gonna eat it, and you're not gonna be able to tell that it's there, so we're gonna do it in black. So
Yeah.
that's in black, and then that is in black too, and you can't see it, so whatever. So then I'm gonna slap giant hieroglyphics on my back in black, and then wander around and see how many people ask me what it says.
Hey, Kevin, I got an interesting question or potentially interesting.
Okay.
Have you noticed any commonalities with any of the faiths or practices and particular dietary traditions?
Yes, absolutely. Historically speaking, almost entirely categorically, dietary restriction is done for one of 2 reasons. It's either done for a specific fasting purpose, like usually for a particular festival, devotion to a particular deity, or, and more rarely, it is done for the purposes of a particular type of mysticism. So you're a part of a mystery school or a mystery cult, and that it requires you to be vegetarian or vegan or whatever the case may be. The exceptions to that rule are Hindu and Buddhism and the Abrahamic traditions. But all of the other traditions, it was done as a specific thing for a specific time, kind of like fasting for Lent. That's a very common practice.
What about like using like any commonalities between faith practices that use similar foods, or value similar foods over others?
Well, like I said, aside from the Dharmic and Abrahamic sort of groupings of faiths, most traditions don't have particular significance to particular foods unless you're talking about what a particular deity wants. So, like Zeus, for instance, it was common in the ancient world for them to sacrifice a bull to Zeus. It may not have been normally as common. Another deity may have had goats sacrificed to him, or pigs, perhaps. And it could be very basic too, like not even with animals. For instance, Aphrodite, pomegranates are sacred to Aphrodite. If that makes sense. Grapes are sacred to Dionysus, and wine in general. So.
How about any sort of value system that's based on nutrition?
Many of the Orphics, the Pythagoreans, and some of the Neoplatonists, as well as many of the Gnostics, were either vegetarian or vegan, but it was not all the way across the board. Not every single member of those mystery traditions felt that it was a necessity, though it could be argued that it was almost completely standard among the Pythagoreans. Like I said, it's associated with the second reason why I said that many people would do that. It's because they're a member of a very specific mystery cult, that it was an ascetic practice. It was expected for people who were dedicated themselves to ascetic practices.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we kind of have a similar thing with Cometicism. Like the high-standing priests, we don't eat fish, and that's because it's certain types of fish are associated with Osiris. But instead of going back and figuring out what antiquity fish we weren't supposed to eat, or they didn't eat an antiquity, the Reconstructionists were just like, no, we're not going to eat fish. That's just easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the knowledge of what's good for the body and what gets put in the body might be informed by a faith practice as opposed to just something that evolved over time.
Well, like with Ayurvedic medicine in India, there's an idea that the heavier the substance that you're eating, the more of a sort of negative energy that it has, that it shouldn't be done in excess. There are there's several Ayurvedic thinkers who have actually suggested for Westerners that it may not necessarily be the complete abstinence from meat that is practical, but rather the restriction of excesses, particularly of red meats. And there are ideas like that were suggested in humorism among the ancient Greeks. They seem to reflect a similar idea. Not too much excess in red meats and fats and the like. Not too many excesses in general, but their focus was more on the balancing of humors and having to do with good physical activity and that sort of thing. A lot of the ideas that we have in the West, having 3 square meals, being active, getting out in the sun, these sorts of things, which are pretty standard in a lot of Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So medicine in general and diet and the things that you're discussing have a semi-religious quality, a semi-spiritual quality, or metaphysical. But even as early as ancient Greece, there was already a move to have medicine to be less specifically religious and more of its own sort of thing. Though it was definitely the case at the time that a lot of the early doctors were kind of operating in and around the temple district, and there were associations with deities associated with healing, particularly Apollo and Asclepius. So it's difficult, but it depends on each culture. You understand?
Yeah. But I definitely see the practice of animal sacrifice could definitely have led to having a greater respect for the properties of each type of food. If it's associated with pleasing a deity, then to me it's not too far of a move to go from that to valuing some foods that are beneficial not only to the body but your spiritual health as well.
Absolutely, and it's an argument that I've made to several more modern EV type people, ethical vegans, who, in my experience, largely in our sort of metropolitan culture, have had a more secular sort of perspective on the practice, even though it's had thousands of years of religious trappings. And one of the things I've mentioned is that probably most indigenous cultures had a very deep, reverent sort of attitude or approach to the killing, hunting, and consumption of meat. You have to understand, like, if you were living in a small community, effectively like a small tribe, and regardless of what period of history, and you had a cow or several cows in your neighborhood, and there was a particular festival that was sacred, and that cow grew to maturity, and you sacrificed that in the sort of town square. Everybody who was there, who was present there, realized that the great sacrifice that was there, and that to house that animal, to feed that animal, to keep that animal, required a great deal of time, money, and energy. So they would often sacrifice a part of the animal and consume the rest of the animal amongst themselves. So, a lot of times the fat, the gristle, and the sort of less edible parts that were rich in a lot of those sorts of nutrients were the ones that were offered first, and then the rest of the meat was usually consumed as a part of a festival, and it was shared. A lot of the problem that we have with our respect for our diet has less to do with what we're eating and more to do with how we're eating and our approach to that. We just have a sheer excess of everything that we've not had in any other point in human history.
Right.
Even with corn and wheat, I mean, just the sheer amount that we're able to make of that is vastly different. And the plants that we actually have are vastly different than they were for even the last 300 years. So.
Yeah.
I mean, as a Kemetic, we kind of do that even now. Like, at least the Reconstructionists. I won't speak for all Kemetics. I'll just speak for the Reconstructionists. Like when we do offerings, we give whatever our offerings are, whether it's like I don't need pig because I'm a devotee of Set, so we don't need pig. So I don't need pig because I'm a devotee of Set, and I don't need fish because I am a priest. But whenever we lay an offering, so much of it has to be given to the god, but it has to be consumed by the community after the god has taken whatever essence it's going to take from it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely getting the sense that I need to be more judicious about my balance of eating the right foods. I have another question, Kevin.
Sure, shoot.
Do you find a commonality among different faiths that there is a place for music in their understanding of the deities? Like there's more a place for music than practices that don't use music at all?
You say that there's is there more significance to musical practices?
I'm just thinking, I'm just guessing that, you know, because of the universality of music in these different belief systems, there's probably usually a significant place, a sacred understanding of the use of music as opposed to practices that don't use music. I'm assuming the role is fairly predominant throughout different faiths.
It's difficult when you're looking at sort of like from my perspective and those who are in similar aspects with Reconstruction and vast differences in culture and language and things that are preserved and things that are not. But what we do know, particularly with like a Greek and Egyptian religion, is that music was definitely prominent in festivals and in ceremonies. With the ancient Greeks, there was special significance applied to musical theory, where we get the idea of the Greek modes. Each one of them was associated with very spiritual connotations. Each one of them with a particular mood, and it would be very common that certain scales or modes would be associated with particular deities. For instance, the Dorian scale was associated very heavily with Apollo.
With Apollo?
Uh-huh.
Interesting. Yeah. That's interesting.
You also have to understand that the way music was, for most of human history, a lot of times an instrument had a very limited range in which you could play. And the sort of even temperament that they use, as opposed to the sort of, or excuse me, there's a term for it, but our typical like tuning in chromatics, where we're precisely tuning to each note, wouldn't have been as common. A lot of times they would have winged it a little more than we would now, where they weren't using like specific. A lot of times they would tune to each other and kind of just go with it. But also, a lot of instruments are diatonic, particularly lyres and various woodwind instruments that would have been very common at the time, like the syrinx and even panpipes. So, oftentimes they would both have to tune the instrument to specific modes or specific keys. If it was a major key, they would tune it to that. If it was this mode, they would turn it to that. And also, particularly with woodwind instruments, they would have to have multiple instruments that had different ranges and different keys available to them to play in different things. The range of keys that we are afforded with a lot of classical music is a refinement of many, many different centuries and improvements of different technologies that have allowed us to even do that in the first place. Much of which we have now in modern music is the result of the 19th century, the standardization of musical instruments, and not just guitars and a lot of your zither instruments and your like violins, violas, cellos, and basses, but also most of your woodwind instruments. The clarinet, the flute, the trumpet, the tuba, even the trombone to a certain extent, though the trombone is related to the sackbut, which was an instrument very common to the Renaissance. But pretty much all your valvings and your specific tunings and all that are a result of improvements that they made on existing instruments that were much more primitive, even as early as the 18th century.
And have you also seen like the content and the style of the music would be different when it's used in a sacred ritual as opposed to what you might hear in a social gathering?
Absolutely. There was much more of a somber and serious tone to liturgical music than there was to the common sort of folk music. Folk music was also a lot more simplistic, and its purpose was more to get people going, get them moving, and stuff like that. It was viewed as such. It was viewed as something that was not necessarily Philistine, but a much more crude and much more kind of basic. Though there is exceptions to those rules. There are certain types of music that were designed to be ecstatic, and in ecstatic rituals, particularly esoteric rituals, a lot of those sorts of music would be incorporated because they were meant to inspire or to stimulate those sorts of basic primal urges. But most of your really heavy, official rituals were done with these sorts of trappings in mind. You really see this in the Baroque period. A lot of Christian-inspired music, particularly. They were deeply, deeply obsessed with the golden mean and a lot of the sort of sacred geometry that led into a lot of the thoughts that they had in the Enlightenment period. So a lot of music was constructed to be this elegant beauty and order and refinement, and that's where a lot of our ideas about classical music really come from.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, well, just to, I mean, getting further on in, more recent centuries, but, people were, commissioned to write music, and it was usually, with a sacred context to it. So they were almost forced into it just out of making a living by their craft.
Think about this for a second, though it's a little bit of a sort of cultural disconnect. All of those little trills and flourishes that you saw with a lot of Bach's music and Mozart and Beethoven, that was their attempt to really put in their own sort of feel to it. It's almost like this sort of equivalent of bending in blues music. It was there to put their sort of signature, their imprint, when many of those people were sort of trying to make a living. So a lot of the music they had to create had to be based on a very particular theme with a very particular subset, or was written for a particular person, or a story that they wanted to sort of tell, particularly with opera.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's examples of expression everywhere. One of the things that's really missing from a lot of classical music, and I think is quite a bit of a shame, is improvisation. There was a whole improvisational history of classical music, particularly Baroque classical music, that's largely been missed because, for very much of the same reasons why we have difficulty interpreting, the religious and philosophical subjects we discuss here, because we're just seeing what's on paper. We're not seeing or feeling really what's going on with a lot of these dry concepts that we're just reading about.
Right. Yeah, and I think in some cases, with Bach in particular, I think a lot of what ends up getting on paper started out as an improvisation. So it sounds like, well, this was just, he had this great idea, and he planned it all out. Yeah, it's very structured, and you can analyze it and get to that point, but a lot of it was based on improvisation.
Look up variations on a theme, Mozart. There are tons of that. Mozart did a bunch of side projects where he would take a single melody, and through the song he would just do variations on that same melody, using the same chord progressions or different chord progressions, variations on that, relative minors, relative majors, all those sorts of things that that are the hallmarks of improvisational music that we've really only started to see with jazz music and blues and rock and roll. But it's all there. The thing is about music theory is it's the framework of all music, regardless of what form you're talking about. I mean, we've had the idea of what blues is for a long time. It's a mixolydian. So those scales have existed for a long time. We're just getting to a point culturally where we're wanting to explore that sound. I mean, every scale, every set of chords that you can do, and every variation on the same kind of chord has a different feeling. has a different theme that's associated with it.
Right. I'm also thinking, because of the strong relation to what was considered sacred in these different cultures, when composers started to expand the vocabulary of the music and broaden the harmonies to include dissonance, I can see how it was initially probably responded to as evil.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of the Devil's Triad?
I've heard of
I might be misquoting that, but there's a term for it. There's a particular...
the Devil's Third.
Thank you, the Devil's Third. That was viewed as horrible, unholy.
Yeah.
There were people who died over that.
Yeah.
No joke.
No, I mean that's what religion does. When people identify something as sacred and they don't see the organic sort of just the power of it to morph into different things. They just associate it with one practice, one way of doing it, and therefore anything that challenges that is threatening.
It's the abuse of religion. Because you understand that everything that things like the church would do in response to these ideas, they started as cultural concepts that they had meaning, they had purpose. I mean, there are very good reasons why a lot of minor scales and music are associated with very dark, often even evil themes. Think about this for a second. Have you ever wondered why they use so many violins when there's a villain? Or when somebody dies tragically? There's very good reasons culturally why we have certain associations with the violin. And a violin's a perfect example of this, because violin has an ability to be very poetic and sing-songy like the human voice, but once it becomes the fiddle, same instrument, becomes something else entirely, and can play entirely different kinds of music.
Yeah.
That sort of dual nature thing that is particularly endemic to the West.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring when it was first performed, and a virtual riot broke out in the audience, and famous people like Debussy, were one of the scoffers, and Debussy's his peer, Maurice Ravel, also an impressionist, he had enough sense to hear the genius and actually spoke out and said, a genius is born, or something like that. So he had people who were tuned into the new development and could recognize the genius, but more often than not, it was not received. I guess it's the same with any kind of revolution. When it first breaks, people don't have the construct in which to analyze it, so it's something unfamiliar, so it gets labeled evil.
It's at least scary to experience it for the first time, and that is enough to shake people up enough to where, even if it's not necessarily seen as evil, it is something to avoid. And if you live in a mindset before going into something like that, where you believe that you avoid what is evil and you go after what is good, then the fact that you have that instinct to avoid it, you would then jump to the conclusion that it may be evil. I think that when the groups that have done that in the past were conditioned to have that response to that response of something being different.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can make the same corollary just to the ideas and practices between different faiths. It's amazing that we can, at this day, sit here in a Google chat and be able to communicate with each other and not call each other evil. I mean, I think it's a real sign of
fucking evil.
What's that?
I'm just fucking with you. I just called you evil, is all.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just the fact that we can do that, I think, is just a great sign of progress and hope for even what we're experiencing right now with people being bombed because they have a viewpoint that's contrary to someone's sacred concepts. It's like basically xenophobia is what it is. I mean, I think Bruce Springsteen's evil, but that's just me.
Very nice, very nice.
I'm definitely an outlier when it comes to that.
I don't know, I'm not a big fan of Bruce Springsteen. I always felt he was a little full of himself.
Yeah, I mean, he's written some amazing things, but overall, to me, they all just sound so derivative of the same melodic line or lack thereof, and very similar chord structure. So I really don't see the originality. But his greatest pieces are very original.
What kind of bothers me about him actually is a combination of that with his sort of approach to the changing of music. He was one of the first older artists who was very outspoken about music piracy, and people getting music from torrents and that sort of thing or whatever, and just basically taking a complete crap on this new generation of kids who didn't really have a lot of exposure to things, don't really have the money to get music. But instead of saying, hey, we should encourage people to, I don't know, get burns of people who actually buy the music legitimately, and then encourage them, if they like it, to buy the actual CD. No, let's just say that every single person who uses music piracy is a horrible person. And I've seen a lot of artists who've done that, who've spoken out against the travesty and how it's destroying all music because people are downloading things illegally. People who would never buy it, regardless. That's what they don't realize is people who are not going to buy a CD are not going to buy a CD. But yeah, I agree, Ruben. It actually is good for the industry because people who would not normally have the money to buy or have no means in which to find out if they'd want to buy are more likely to buy the CD later once they've heard that the music is good. And it also forces people to really assess what they're actually into.
Yeah, and be exposed to something they wouldn't ordinarily, purchase or be familiar with, just like a religious idea.
Exactly.
The people who generally, and there are exceptions, there's tons of exceptions, and it's widely varied, but those who tend to pirate the most tend to also spend the most money on the same types of media that they pirate. Every study I've ever seen points to that correlation.
Well, let me give you an example. When I had my Spotify account, I still have it. I'm probably going to renew it again. It's $10 a month. It's not terrible. I've found more music and have purchased more CDs because I was able to listen to entire albums for free, unlimited, than I was when I, had to get a burn from a friend of a friend or had to listen to YouTube versions of said album, and probably not even the best albums that artist has. So free music in many ways can actually help to stimulate stagnating industries, or stagnating music industries at least.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of the corollary to our current problem with extreme radical and violent acts, and I'm wondering if there really is any hope when something is that intransigent to be part of this multi-voiced community, I'm wondering if there is really any hope to it. I mean, the one hope I did hear over all of this Charlie Hebdo stuff is that the Egyptian president spoke out and said that he thought Islam needed revolutionizing so that it would become more, that it wouldn't be perceived by the world community as violent.
Modernity is the salvation of Islam. Having exposure to information, having people who can have access to the internet, have access to all of these different sources of information, whether it's, you know, freaking cat pictures on Facebook or, you know, whole downloaded versions of Islamic criticisms or other religions or
a Brian
technology.
Or a Brian Eno album.
Yeah, exactly.
Chill out, brothers.
But I really think that in the convening decades, that the increased exposure to the rest of the world by people living in these nations, particularly young people in these nations, it will happen from the ground up. That these nations will change. I think a lot of them will leave, as a lot of them have over the decades. A lot of people will go to different countries, parts of Europe, the Americas, and Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, I mean, a lot of these other places. But ultimately, the people who are there and want to be there, they're going to start saying stuff. I think eventually it's going to be revolution within their own countries. We're seeing bits and pieces of it. We're seeing the start of it now with Egypt and Syria. But I mean, some of it is very deeply, deeply entrenched, particularly in Israel and Palestine. But it's hard to say. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. Some good, some bad. It's not an easy issue.
Yeah.
It never has been.
Well, again, I'm thinking back to what I was saying earlier. It's basically a revolution, and revolutions are always met. There's always violence and resistance met with it once it's being introduced. So I think there's a healthy way of introducing it. I would hope where we could minimize the violence, but there's going to, it's just the nature of the beast, so to speak, is going to be violent, and like you're saying, because it's been entrenched in centuries prior. We look at it now, and everybody's up in arms, and just being outraged, and it could be just the fact that we're just observing it without putting it in the context of the time it takes for these types of things to actually take hold.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we're outraged, we're angry, we're upset, and all that. But is really anybody surprised? Really? Is anybody really surprised that things like this happen? With the kinds of nations that they have, with the kinds of government that they have, with the socioeconomic status, the state of people living in those countries right now. Is anybody really surprised that things like this happen?
Right. Especially with technology, because you can be face to face like we are here all across the world, and it can work to the betterment of personal and communal growth, and it can work negatively if it's perceived with that kind of forbidden type of intellectual construct. So I was thinking of Marshall Rosenberg, who's this guy I've mentioned a couple times there. He's famous for using his nonviolent communication model to resolve conflicts between spouses as well as between warring nations. And he does it by each party being able to identify what the other party considers a need that's not being met in the conflict. And as soon as each party is able to see what the the challenging party's need is, then as soon as that happens, he's found that the solution organically just emerges in a fairly quick amount of time. But the essential part of it is for each party to recognize what the other party considers as a need for that conflict to resolve. But when I've been trying to apply that model to this radical terrorism, I'm really kind of wondering how that can be useful, because I'm thinking, well, what would Paris say to these bombers as recognizing their need, and what would a terrorist recognize as a need in these cartoonists? I can't come up with an answer for that. But I think it's interesting that his model has been, he's been doing this for, most of his life. He's in his 80s now. He's been doing it for, 40 years, and it's been just tremendously powerful. He even says it normally takes 20 minutes after each party can identify what the other's need is. It usually doesn't take more than 20 minutes for a emerging solution to occur.
Well, there's a saying. It's been reiterated to different extents over the years. It's been said in movies and books and everything. People are smart. The person is smart. People are dumb. They're erratic, they're irrational, they're angry, and all the rest. If you have a bunch of people sitting down, 10 people, go to a round table, nice little interfaith, whatever the case may be. There are exceptions, obviously. You have that one person who just cannot see to any degree of reason, who cannot agree to disagree. But generally, when you have small groups of people, it's much easier to come to that level of consensus. The more people you have, the harder that becomes. And people become entrenched. The group consciousness takes over. Now, at the end of the day, we are still animals. No matter what anybody wants to tell you, we are still animals. And it takes a lot of time and effort to work against those urges, to be able to be rational, to cultivate oneself, to reach a sort of sense of balance. It's not easy. And I think it's very tempting for those of us living in the West to sort of perpetuate this like first world problems nonsense. We don't realize how difficult it is for whole societies to develop towards a more, progressive and more nonviolent kind of state. But all of that violence is still there. Look at the FBI statistics. How many people are killed on a regular basis? How many people, a botched robbery, how often that happens? How many, rapes and molestations exist? Even in the most well-functioning societies, there is always going to be violence. It's not this black and white that we live in this wonderful non-violent utopia, or we live in a totally barbaric medieval society where you can be killed for looking at somebody funny.
Yes, Steven Pinker wrote a book, and his conclusion is that we're actually experiencing less violence now than we used to. I haven't read the book. Someone was talking about it here the other day. Something about angels. Reuven probably knows the book I'm talking about. Something about angels is in the title. But I thought that was interesting, especially given go from the Civil War and here in America up to the current day. I mean, when people are studying history, I mean they're almost have to be studying violence. So I was interested to see how his theory is validated.
Sure.
Yeah, better angels of our nature. Thank you.
Well, I think to a certain extent, that's definitely the case. But I think that a large part of that is the quality of life that, at least from the sort of Western perspective that a lot of these things are written in, is drastically improved from what it was before in a lot of places in the world. And a lot of violence is because of that. Because people are desperate. They're in a certain situation. And in certain areas, violence becomes enculturated. You know, that you initially do so to survive, but then every crime that you commit, you become more and more a part of the system of criminality. And a lot of people get totally lost in that, and at the end of the day, they end up being incarcerated for much worse, much more serious crimes. Not to say that people don't have their own choices to make, and that people need to be people don't need to be held accountable, because they do. But a lot of people who are in prison are in jail because a series of bad decisions were not rectified, and they just got worse.
Yeah.
And the social systems in place to help people to get out of that in a lot of places are not there.
Right. I'm thinking about my own career is predominantly based on behavior management. You know, the worst programs are the ones where, you know, majority of the staff are ignoring behaviors and just trying to get through the day, when really what they need to be doing more often than not is finding out ways of giving people better choices to make, to the point where they choose just for their own betterment to avoid those decisions rather than make them on a rewards punishment motivation.
I think a lot of the reason why, particularly in the West, and most especially in our American system, why a lot of our political systems don't work the way they should with the two-party system, is not that we have two parties, but rather that we have two parties that focus more on being opposed than working together and encouraging each other.
Absolutely.
Well, like, think of it this way. If the more conservative side is more about, personal responsibility, financial and fiscal health, having a workforce and a populace of people who are assimilated to the local culture, who work hard, who are American and proud of being American, and that sort of thing. That's the sort of kind of Republican kind of concept. And on the other side, you have liberals who are more about, the civil rights aspect and people having the right of that sort of pursuit of liberty and happiness, and having good social systems to help support people, particularly those who are in misfortune for whatever reason or another.
Yeah, they're more justice based.
Then really that justice-based liberal side should be encouraging the conservative side to include those elements into the systems they want to create.
Right.
The conservative side should be trying, to cooperate with the liberal side and give them a little bit of contrast, maybe rein in some of the idealism that exists in the Liberal Party, that maybe to get those things to actually function, we need these practical sides to actually be implemented, to actually construct a neutral framework in between. So when there's discourse going between each other, there's actual debate going on. Not just mudslinging, but actual debate. Okay, this is what you want. This is why I think that the way you're trying to go about it isn't working. Here's what I think we should do. And then they go back, and they go back and forth, and then they find some kind of middle ground in between.
Right. I mean, it gets back to kind of what we've been talking about, just finding a balance, where you have different forces that appear to be at odds with each other, but that's just because they're unwilling to recognize the common, what they hold in common. So if you focus on that common ground, then you have that opportunity for growth and basically, creating new growth, really. So yeah, it's that's why I love the yin and yang symbol so much. Is it just, to me, just speaks so strongly about that. And whenever there's conflict, the first thing I always think of is, well, what's out of balance?
Well, here's like a good example, and I think really kind of speaks to the theme of the room. There was a big sort of controversy about some of the ideas, and particularly that George Bush was kind of on about with faith-based initiatives. The general idea of that concept was to take some of the burden off of social systems and providing certain levels of care to people through existing churches and temples and the like. And I think a lot of the discussion from the other side didn't see the value in that, despite the fact that a lot of the sort of thematic elements that you see, the sort of aesthetic you see with a lot of like liberal politics, is this sort of grassroots, from the ground up, your local co-op grocery, people cooperating and extending charity to one another and being cooperative. So even though that there may be more of a secular sort of context to a lot of the liberal side, if they are taking off they're offsetting a lot of those social systems in some way, if that functions correctly, and people who want to be participating in said faith-based sort of program or community are doing so, they're making a community that is self-reliant. I mean, they're making a community that allows that to do so.
Right, which is why it appeals to libertarians.
Yeah, and conversely, taking it from a perspective of a more categorically liberal context, whether it's a humanist organization or a Unitarian Universalist organization or a pagan faith or whatever the case may be, seems to be endemic to that sort of concept, they should take a little bit more of example from that sort of system from the other side. Dare I say, even from the Christian right. Some of what they are doing actually functions and works well in social systems, particularly their ability to have some degree of discretion. Though there are most certainly people from the far right who have no discretion and no decorum and are yelling and screaming and spewing vitriol over everything. There are a lot of examples of people who keep to themselves and are very much about having a tightly knit community of people who are on the same page.
Yeah.
I just think that both sides can learn a lot from each other, but still be the same, to still be different sides. It's fine to be on different sides of the fence, to not have the same idea about something.
Right.
That's why we have the political process in the first place.
Yeah. This reminds me of one of the projects I used to have the students do every marking period in social studies. Was I would give them a theme, say individualism or the power of the individual, something like that. And it was up to everybody in the classroom, without my guidance, to determine how they were going to create a skit or a play that was going to be videotaped that would describe the what the group wanted to say about individualism. And they had to determine who was going to be the director, who was going to be the writer, the artists, the sound engineers, the set, the set. I can't think of the right term, but
set designer.
Yeah, set designers. And it basically forced them into a democratic experiment where they learned how to get someone to agree with you. And it was always just so fascinating just to sit back. And of course there were times where I had to step in because the students weren't, adults aren't skilled in that. I wouldn't expect students to be, but more often than not, I was really amazed that people with, I want to be director, no, I want to be the director, and all this kind of stuff. They ended up figuring out, because by the end, I only gave them 1 week. So they started with an idea, and on Monday and on Friday, we would watch what they came up with. So the pressure was on to create, and it's amazing what can happen when you set a common goal and people put some of those differences that they thought were so important aside in order to achieve a common creation.
It's something that I've actually struggled with a bit myself, particularly in my youth. This idea about something and not the actual practical application of the idea. Like I get so stuck on the sort of finer minutia, almost like a sort of semantic loop, as I've often called it, when I'm when I'm trying to go towards a pursuit or a particular subject matter or a decision in life, whatever it may be, no matter how topical, casual, or serious or involved it may be. And always the thing that gets me out of it is, how does it work? Not what is it involved, but how does it work? So I think a proactive approach to any sort of subject matter or pursuit is really the solution to many, many problems.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that about how does it work, because again, it's reminding me of Marshall Rosenberg, and one of the things he always gets people to focus on, like he'll say, well, what is it, Frank, that what is it about Kevin that's bothering you? And I would say, Kevin talks too much, and so that's just me placing a value, making a value judgment. And that's not going to be useful to coming to a solution. So what I would have to do is say there's something specific that you do that I'm having difficulty with, and it's not. So you have to look at the content of the language, and if there's a value system being placed, then that's not going to work. It has to be like you're saying, what works? What is the action that is a concern? And it might be I could say, well, I think in interfaith community talks. Let's see, I'd be doing a value system there. I'm trying to think of an example.
No, okay, I'll give you a perfect example from my own experiences and from what people have told me over the years. I sometimes have a tendency to talk over people, to dominate the conversation when there are other people who clearly want to talk. And kind of corollary to that, and sort of dovetailing with that, is sometimes that I get so entrenched in my own thoughts and my own sort of ideas that I want to get down to, that I don't pay attention to the sort of cues that other people are giving me, whether it's through text online or through the little microphone being unmuted, or in the real world where person seems like they have something on their tongue that they want to get out, and I'm not looking at their face to see, oh, this person is trying to get something out.
Right.
Specific things that I do that follow the theme of he talks too much, but going into more detail to the actual actions, which are the problem.
Right, because then what you're getting down to is, like, I'm trying to get back to what you originally said, is what each of us needs to get down to is, what is it that's working?
Yeah. And conversely, knowing those parallels. What about the excessive talk actually is good? Some people have said it's good that I keep the conversation going, because I always have some idea, no matter how extraneous, that I can get out and kind of jump in. And I'm willing to take risks to talk about something that might be a little weird or unusual.
Right.
So there's good and there's bad. And I think that's why, one of the exercises they do, particularly in education, and earlier education especially, is the Venn diagram, or even the trigram, when they do 3 different interlocking triangles together, showing the parallels between what about them are the same and what about them are different. And each circle that you create, if you create it correctly, has parallels between all sides. So circle 1, circle 2, circle 3. Circle 1 and 2 have these in common. Circle 2 and 3, or 1 and 2 over here, 2 and 3 over here, and then 1, 2, and 3 all have something in common.
Right.
And they all have something that's totally different.
Yeah, and I just find that to be fascinating, because it just sort of speaks to the power of practicality, where those areas, converge and share things in common. And also, just in our own political system, what happens in every election? The people from usual extreme sides start talking more to the middle group. And a lot of people just look at that, and it sort of gives moderates a bad name, like, well, you're just modifying what you're saying just to appeal to a greater number of people. I look at it differently. I look at it like, no, the reason why these people are getting elected is because that middle group actually reflects what would work.
You're not appealing to, you're finding the appeal. Does that make sense? It's a proactive perspective on the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying it.
Actually, it's interesting we were sort of getting into this sort of modality of practicalisms and such. I've actually thought for some of the things that I'm trying to pursue, and I've done bits of it with, moving into this new apartment and, getting my groceries all set up. What system do I want to have? When do I take out the trash? When do I water the plants? What do I want to have in my fridge, and what do I want to have in my cupboards? But
also,
are
you in a new place now?
Yeah, I'm in a new place. I've been here for the past month and a half or so.
Oh, okay.
So I think you may have seen it before. I don't remember. You probably weren't paying all that much attention to the messy backdrop I have.
No, but, I'm just looking at the backdrop, and it does look different. But I've seen you within the last month and a half, so.
Yeah, it's a one-bedroom apartment, so that's pretty cool. I've actually thought of taking some of these little skills they teach you in school. Creating an outline, doing a Venn diagram, making a list of pros and cons, and these sorts of things, and applying it to some of the things and questions I've had of how I want to pursue something. I think that hashing out ideas, brainstorming, is actually very useful. I've actually wanted to do a little bit. I may actually do it tonight when I have some just screw around time with my whole musical pursuit. But I honestly think that a brainstorming class, like at a regular community college for anybody who wants to pay the money, would be useful. There's a lot of people who have existing jobs or homemakers or whatever, even just young kids just getting into college, who could use a class that teaches them how to brainstorm, teaches them how to be goal-oriented, to figure out how they want to make solutions for things. You could even call it that, Solutions 101 or something like that. Solution management, or even something to that effect. There's a lot of people who could use a lot of these sorts of techniques that you either only see in higher education or in psychology, that are very useful for purposes that don't just involve working at the specific job, or being a psychologist, or being an educator, or going through therapy yourself, but just to deal with regular everyday things. There's a common thing that you see a lot, particularly in psychology, of the sort of little things management. A lot of what helps people, particularly those who are dealing with a psychiatric problem, or even just rehabilitation from an accident or a fall, little things that they sort of teach you how to do to manage little everyday things that a lot of us kind of take for granted, and really only start to focus on when the floor has been pulled from under us, or when the carpet's been pulled from under us.
Yeah, not so observant. You don't notice something till there's an earthquake.
And a lot of that is endemic to our sort of, I don't want to say laissez-faire, but almost apathetic kind of culture that we have. And you really see this in medicine. We don't have preventative medicine. We have, oh, shit just went down, let's try to fix it, scramble and try to find a solution to it because we need to. A sort of culture of procrastination. And it's been said before a million times in a million different ways. But it's always been that way. You have to be proactive. You have to kind of encourage yourself to be proactive, or you'll just fall into procrastination. That's just human nature. We almost don't want to deal with something until we absolutely have to.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you're a procrastinator. It's that everyone's a procrastinator, just at different degrees. And we have to be able to manage that effectively to make any kind of progress in life.
Right. I'm thinking back to what you were saying about the. Can you remember how you phrased it about you used the verb appeal in two different ways?
Yeah. Instead of appealing to, finding the appeal. It's a more collective and communal, cooperative language set that I'd be using, as opposed to a very active and aggressive one that suggests a sort of plea or a sales pitch.
Right. And I was thinking of just how social media has almost, in some ways it's great, like what we're experiencing here, but in other ways, people can have a tendency just to focus on their desires. What do you want to do? What do you want to look at? What do you want to say? Who do you want to talk to? Instead of looking at it as, how can I help someone else meet their need? So you're focusing sort of on that appeal aspect. You're looking to, you're not goal oriented in the sense of the goal, I'm working towards something that's far off. The goal is ever before you, and the goal is your actual work. And in this case, the work is being available to help someone meet their need.
You remember what I was talking about one of the last times about establishing an environment, creating a roadmap for success? We talked about it with regards to education in particular.
It's ringing a bell.
Well, I was sort of mentioning the idea that one of the best things to do as an educator, and particularly as an administrator, and most particularly that's what we discussed with like parent-teacher relationship, is with a parent to describe them the whole setup. Sort of the way that the syllabus exists in college environments.
Right.
Really sort of establishing these things in the way that if I had a friend of mine and I wanted to tell him where to go down the street, that's the example I gave, instead of kind of giving him a point by point and expecting him to be able to follow my directions and remember the shit, get out my phone, pull up the GPS, and show them the map. So they get a clear indication of where they're actually going, of the whole parameter. And then discussing with them, and the example that I gave, how would they want to do it? Do they have a better idea that might work better for them? Maybe they know the area better, or this part of the area, or maybe their driving style is, or maybe they have something that they're towing, and they don't want to make too many left turns. That kind of thing.
Or they have a helicopter.
Well, if they have a helicopter, they just say, "Fuck me." Here's the address. No, but The reason why I mention that is because I think with a lot of task orientation, there is a sort of aspect of getting your cards out on the table. Every so often, when I'm on my computers, I look at my desktop, I look at my folders on the computer. God, this is a mess. I want to organize it. So sometimes what I'll do, seriously, and I do this with a bunch of things while I'm on the computer, figuring something out, I'll open up a notepad and I'll start typing every little thing I want to list in a particular subject that I'm trying to kind of hash out. So I'm grocery listing what I want to do. So what folders do I want to have on this page? What folders do I want to have in this directory? Where do I want to put this? And I can condense some of my text files together. Well, for some reason, I have 6 different files named password. I should probably put all my password files together and make copies of them and put them on my external hard drive. Organizing and task management really helps to make your life a lot easier and takes off the stress. It can seem boring, tedious, and laborious, in fact, to do some of these things, but these little things make a huge difference, like cleaning out your coffee pot once a month or once every 200 coffees. That coffee is just going to taste that much better. I just actually swept and Swiffered my whole apartment because I have wooden floors, and I haven't done it since I moved, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of dust on the floor. So I cleaned it up, and it makes a huge difference. You feel little things, you see little things. The acoustics are better in the house because there's not dust all over the place for no reason.
Right.
And you've cleaned up all the stuff that was on the floor that was giving you problems to begin with, and then you start getting new ideas. Like my fresh laundry, I haven't folded it yet. Maybe I should get a small basket to put it in there temporarily at the side of the bed, so it's not all strung out all over the floor. So in a day or so, when I actually finally get to folding everything, it's all there, and I don't have to be confused. Oh, is this dirty? Is this clean? That sort of things. So every time you do task management, every time you do goal-oriented, you create a map for yourself, new parts of the map become highlighted. They become you become aware of them because you've engaged yourself on that level that you don't always do.
Yeah, and whenever I'm faced with those kind of practical, useful, sort of organizational constructs, whatever, just like you mentioned, just in a practical context, I always think of, how does this relate to the philosophical and ideological realm, and what ideas have I allowed to just accumulate dust in my mind, and somehow just because they're there, I might not be thoroughly aware that they're there, but because I haven't addressed them in either fitting those ideas into my new synthesized way of looking at things, their presence is there, it's collecting dust, and it's becoming clutter. So then when it comes time to actually, really make a decision or really think about something seriously, I can't get through all the clutter. The clutter is in the way for me seeing clearly. So I often get a charge, just like you're saying, of being organized that way, and I've kind of learned to just keep things that way, in my apartment, so that it's almost like it's my good faith effort of what I'm also trying to do in my mind, and divest myself of the burden of allowing ideas and traditions and former patterns of thinking just to hang on because I didn't take the time to reintegrate them or dispense with them.
I think there's something too, speaking of this sort of the vitality of organization. When you commit yourself to organizing something, even if it's just for a short period, there's a very instant, real kind of result. And a lot of that really does make people feel a lot better about themselves. Because it really can encourage confidence. I think that there is a direct correlation between the sort of chosen suffering of cleaning up something, of fixing something up, and the eventual result of the finished product. And I think that the sort of lack of proactivity that we see in a lot of aspects of society is largely what keeps people pretty depressed, and may actually be contributing to some of our misappropriation of certain terms, of conditions, of even sociological features of said problem or fixation, when a lot of it really just kind of comes down to doing things as opposed to not doing things.
Yeah.
And that's why I say my sort of perspective has really colored this, because when you're in a situation where you have to deal with yourself, when you really have to sort of build the pieces back up again, you realize the value of these very simple and practical sorts of solutions and methods to getting an achieved result.
Yeah.
Because you have to oftentimes deal with something that maybe not everyone else would have to deal with. A similar analogy would be, as I mentioned earlier in the chat, how my mother was dealing with college. She went back to college, a while before she ended up passing away. She went to a community college, and she really appreciated learning. She had been teaching kids piano and everything, and she actually went to college and got a 4.0 GPA. She ended up getting, I believe, an associate's degree. And study after study has actually shown that a lot of people who are older, even if only a little bit, than the typical college student, have more of an appreciation of those sorts of structures, of that level of commitment, and those sorts of, I don't want to say parameters, but existing buffers against procrastination that maybe a 25-year-old might not have.
Yeah.
I'm sure you see it quite a bit yourself. The funny thing is it seems to invert once you get to lower level education with not to say that there aren't a bunch of 10, 11, and 12-year-olds that are damn procrastinators, but they seem to value it a little bit more, because one of the things that's the hallmark of childhood, and particularly adolescence, is finding your identity and finding your purpose in life. And so many children are always thinking about the future. They want to be an adult now. So when you present them a goal within their level, of course, they may think that they know more than they know, but they don't, of course. But they see it more as a challenge to get to the next stage, to get to learn more and to get more education, while at the same time still being children and still wanting to play and have fun. And I think that's another extra missing element of the sort of adult mind, is not just the sort of future thinking and goal orientation, but also being able to live very much in the moment and be able to appreciate these very simple and often very entertainment-oriented sort of things, without becoming too consumed with one or the other.
Right. I'm thinking of, I mentioned before, Chick Sent Me High. It's the author that wrote a book called Flow, and he found the commonality between successful people like artists, athletes, educators, scientists, whatever. They get so much into their activity, and the activity is so rewarding in and of itself that they lose track of time, and they really get into this creative flow. And that's kind of what I was trying to say before about using communication and interaction with others as an opportunity to meet needs. So the action is always rewarding when you're helping someone meet a need, and if that's what you do, then it sort of takes care of the procrastinating issue, because you're actively doing something that's connecting you with someone's survival needs. When you talk about needs, they're the things that are required for life. So you're always focused in that realm of sort of affirming life. The life in me is affirming the life in you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I think it's funny when I criticize the Bible, and these fundamentalists say, well, how are you going to know what to do, or how are you going to know what's God's word and what's not God's word in the Bible? And I'm just like, it's easy. How do you live your life? You live your life by being drawn to what is producing life. So it's no different looking at the Bible than it is having a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
You just grab it. You just are magnetically drawn to what is producing life. Anyway, that's my motivation. That's how I stay in the flow, and I'm not worried about future goals because I'm meeting the goal of the moment, like you say. And it's so liberating. I'm so excited about it. That's why I can't stop talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a good time on air here at Interfaith. I was really glad that we got a lot of people in here, and for those of you that are listening on the YouTube, I hope you enjoy.